10,000 men eat roughly 40,000 caddies of grain per day. I had done the math before Zhao Yan finished her sentence. She was still talking. 40 days march distance, confirmed clan markings, Beitor's riders, single scout on the northern ridge, and I was already running numbers in my head the way I always did when something important was happening. 40,000 caddies per day meant 1.6 million caddies over 40 days, just to keep the horde fed on the march. That was before they arrived, before they started sieging anything, before they started burning things because burning is cheaper than feeding. 10,000 men didn't march 40 days through famine country because they wanted to. They marched because they were starving. Chen Wei. Zhao Yan's voice cut through the arithmetic. She was standing in the doorway of the grain storage with her arms crossed, watching me, the way she always watched me when she knew my head had gone somewhere else. Her scar caught the morning light. "Still here," I said. The scout was on the ridge at dawn. Young Pao spotted him coming down. He was gone before anyone reached the top. She paused. Beitor's clan markings. Single rider, northern gear. He did not stop to look at the fields. He stopped to count the buildings. That was the detail that mattered, not the fields. The buildings. He was counting storage capacity. I set down the inventory brush and looked at the grain storage around me. 412 sacks of preserved grain. 240 jars of pickled vegetables. 60 barrels of dried fish I had traded up from the southern river towns last month. 90 days of stores for my current 312 registered dependents. More concentrated food supply than anything within 100 li in any direction. I had built the richest granary in the western counties, and somewhere in the back of my mind, in a place I had been avoiding for 6 months, I had known this moment was coming. "How long?" I said. 40 days if they're at the winter camp. 35 if they push. 35 days. I looked at the wall. North section half-built, dressed stone. Zhao Yan's design. Deep foundation. I'd been proud of it 3 weeks ago. Now I was calculating how long it would take to complete it, and how far short we'd fall. The system notification arrived before I finished the thought. Not a ding. Those had stopped 6 weeks ago. The same night the settlement crossed the township threshold, and the county lord rode away with his deal and his ambitious plans to replicate what I'd built. The pop-up notifications had retired themselves. In their place, once per day, a quartermaster's report appeared at the edge of my vision. Cold, formatted, military dispatch style. No celebration, no fanfare, just numbers. Quartermaster's report. Day 94 registered dependents. 312 spatial farm output. 312 units cycle war tier activated. Threat vector confirmed. Northern approach, Beitor's Iron Grass Clan. Estimated force, 8,000 to 12,000. System cost reminder. Each new registered dependent reduces host vitality by 1 day. Current vitality debt, 312 days. Do not register dependents carelessly. I read the cost reminder twice. 312 days. That was the price I was paying for 312 people on my register. Every person I had taken in, every refugee, every worker, every family from Tosker's inland settlement, had cost me 1 day of my own life. The spatial farm scaled to the number of people I was responsible for, but the scaling wasn't free. It never had been. I had known this since the war tier activated and the system had laid the cost out in plain language. I had registered people anyway. Because the alternative was watching them starve on a coast that the Empire had decided didn't matter, and I wasn't built for that. But 312 days meant I had to be careful now. Every new dependent I registered from this point forward was a day I would never get back, and 10,000 starving barbarians were 35 days away. "Zhao Yan," I said, "how many fighters do we have?" She didn't hesitate. She never hesitated on head counts. 20 trained militia. 12 part-trained. Old Zhang's men at the home settlement add 8 more. But they can't reach us in time if the horde comes direct. She paused. 40 fighters. Against 10,000. "We're not fighting 10,000, I said. She looked at me. "We're feeding 10,000, I said. "Or we're trying to. The fighting is what happens if the feeding fails." She was quiet for a moment. This was the part she didn't like. Not because she disagreed, but because it went against everything her father had built her to do. Her father had been a battalion captain. He had taught her that threats were answered with force. And she wasn't wrong. Force had its place. But force against 10,000 with 40 men wasn't tactics. It was a funeral. "Tell me the rest," she said finally. I pulled out the survey copy I'd been carrying in my pack for 6 months, the same one I'd had since before any of this started, the record of everything I'd built and planned and noted down. I opened it to the page I'd been writing on last night. "The wall first," I said. "North section needs to be finished. I want it done in 20 days, not 30. That means triple the brick team and we pull labor from everything non-essential. The marketplace stays running. Su Ling manages it. We can't stop trade income right now." I turned the page. Second, the county lord's requisition order. Zhao Yan's jaw tightened. She had seen the document arrive yesterday. We both knew what it meant. The county lord's requisition order was 3 paragraphs of formality and 1 honest disaster. The formality said, "In light of the confirmed northern threat, the Imperial Western Army requires immediate grain allocation from all producing townships in the affected zone. Township Elder Chen Wei is hereby ordered to surrender 60 days of grain stores to the Imperial supply line by the end of the current month. 60 days of stores, out of 90. Leaving 30 days for 312 people, with 10,000 hungry soldiers 35 days away. The Empire did not send soldiers to protect the granary, it sent clerks to empty it. We comply?" Zhao Yan said. Her voice was flat. She already knew the answer she wanted. "We don't refuse," I said. "Refusing an imperial requisition order is treason. The county lord would have grounds to strip my title and send soldiers." I looked at her. "But complying with a requisition order and being unable to comply are different things. You can't surrender grain you don't have in the form they're requesting." She looked at me. "We have the grain." "We have grain," I said. "We don't have grain in the form of Imperial Standard Category A allocation bales, properly weighed, labeled, and documented according to Western Army Supply Protocol." I paused. "Which takes time to prepare. Significant time. And during that preparation period, Su Ling might find several procedural complications in the order itself." Zhao Yan was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're going to stall them." "I'm going to comply very carefully," I said. "There's a difference." She almost smiled. It wasn't the smile I wanted. She wanted to fight, and I was giving her paperwork. But she had learned over 6 months that my paperwork had teeth. "What else?" she said. "Meng Da," I said. Meng Da arrived with the first refugee column from the north. There were 63 of them total, families mostly, some elderly, a handful of men who looked like they'd been farmers 3 months ago and hadn't slept properly since. They came over the northern ridge at midday carrying what they could on their backs, and the particular exhaustion of people who had been moving for long enough that stopping didn't feel like relief yet. I was at the wall site when Zhao Yan brought them in. I watched them cross the yard with the organized movement of people who had learned to move efficiently because efficiency was survival. No stragglers. No one wasting energy on anything that wasn't necessary. The man at the front wasn't the oldest, but he was the one people kept glancing at. Stocky, maybe 50, with hands that told a story even from 20 meters away. Thick, scarred across the knuckles, the particular calluses that come from working stone. He carried a leather roll across his back. Not clothes. Tools. I walked over. "Meng Da?" I said. He stopped. Looked at me. His eyes were the assessing kind, the kind that takes measurements without asking permission. "Who's asking?" he said. "The man who built this wall," I said. I pointed at the north section. "Tell me what's wrong with it." He looked at the wall for a long moment. His eyes moved from the foundation line to the upper course, tracking the mortar joints, checking the corner alignment, noting the section where we'd had to adjust for a subsurface rock outcrop, and the adjustment showed. "Corner tower," he said. "Northeast. The foundation stones are set level, but the slope beneath them isn't uniform. In 6 months, the tower settles east by 2 fingers. In a year, the joint cracks. In 2 years." He stopped. "You already know." "I know," I said. "I was hoping someone else would catch it, which means you're either a mason or you've worked with enough masons to think like one." "Master Mason," he said. 30 years. Built the east gate at Lincheng before the raiders burned it." He paused. "I watched them burn it. The gate held. The wall held. They burned the city around it and left the gate standing because they couldn't bring it down." His voice didn't change. "I built that gate." I looked at him. 312 days of vitality debt already. Every new registration cost me 1 more. 1 master mason who could fix my northeast tower, redesign my wall completion timeline, and build siege fortifications that a raiding force 10 times my garrison couldn't breach. I did the math. "I need you to look at the full wall plan," I said. "Tonight, I'll have Su Ling arrange quarters for your people. Tomorrow morning, you tell me how long the north section takes with your methods. Meng Da looked at me for another long moment. "You're the Thunder Lord," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's what people are calling me," I said. "Are the stories true?" "Depends which stories." "The ones about feeding people," he said. "Not the thunder part, the feeding part." I met his eyes. 3 meals a day, I said. Clean water. Luqing runs a medical station. If you work, you eat. If you can't work, you still eat. He was quiet. "My people haven't had 3 meals in 2 months, he said. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm telling you now, so you can tell them." He turned and said something to the column behind him. I didn't hear it clearly, but I heard the sound that went through the group afterward. Not cheering, not celebration. Something quieter than that. The sound 63 people make when they let themselves believe something is real. That night, Meng Da ate 3 bowls of Liu Qing's vegetable stew and didn't say a word through any of them. Afterward, he sat with the wall plans I gave him and didn't look up for 2 hours. When he finally looked up, he said, 20 days. For the full north section? If you give me 30 workers and don't move them to anything else. He tapped the corner tower sketch. I rebuild the northeast foundation first. 3 days. Everything else goes faster if the anchor point is right. He looked at me. You had the right idea. The execution had one mistake. Tell me the mistake, I said. He did. For 40 minutes, in the patient technical language of a man who had built things that outlasted the cities around them, Meng Da walked me through exactly where my engineering had been sound, and exactly where it had assumed soil conditions that weren't there. I listened to every word. This was what I had missed, not knowledge, but experience. I had the engineering principles from my old life. Meng Da had 30 years of building on this specific type of ground, in this specific climate, with these specific materials. The combination of what I knew and what he knew was worth more than either alone. By the end of the night, we had a revised wall plan. 20 days for the north section, 11 days for the east section. The full perimeter complete in 31 days, 4 days before the Horde's earliest possible arrival. The math was tight. It was always tight, but it worked. Quartermaster's report, Day 95 registered dependents, 376. Spatial farm output, 376 units, cycle vitality debt, 376 days. New dependents registered, 64. Host acknowledged cost, 64 new days. Meng Da and his 63 people. I closed the report. I had acknowledged the cost. Su Ling found the first problem in the requisition order on day 96. She came to find me at the wall site with her ledger under her arm, and the particular expression she got when numbers had told her something important, and she was deciding how to say it. Not worried, focused. The order specifies Category A allocation bales, she said. Standard weight 40 caddies each. Imperial supply seal required on each bale. She opened the ledger to the relevant page. We don't have Imperial supply seals. Only the Western Army Supply Commissioner's office issues them. Which commissioner? I said. She looked at me. Duan Fei. Imperial Supply Commissioner, Western Regions. The name landed differently than it should have. I had heard that name before. Not here, not on this coast. In a report. A report I had written myself, 6 months ago, before any of this. When I had still been a junior logistics officer writing assessments that nobody read, I had flagged a supply commissioner in the Western regions for irregular allocation patterns. Grain authorized, downgraded, listed as delivered, never arrived. The report had been filed, stamped, and buried. Duan Fei, the same man who had been systematically redirecting grain away from struggling townships for years, was now the man whose office had to authorize the seals on grain we were supposed to surrender to the Imperial supply line. The same supply line he was skimming. I looked at Su Ling. The order can't be complied with, I said slowly. Without authorization seals we don't have, from an office that hasn't responded to any township communication in 4 months, Su Ling said. I checked the county records. No supply commissioner correspondence received in this zone for 4 months. She paused. Which means our requisition compliance is dependent on receiving seals from an office that has effectively gone silent. She tilted her head slightly. We can document this. Document everything, I said. She was already writing. I looked north. 34 days. The wall going up stone by stone, 60 new mouths fed and working. Su Ling finding the threads in Duan Fei's paperwork that would eventually pull the whole thing apart, and somewhere in the back of my calculation, a guilt I hadn't fully faced yet. The richest granary in the western counties. The reports that had gone out, my surplus shipments, my production records, my documented output, all of it accurate, All of it filed through the correct channels, all of it eventually reaching Duan Fei's office, the richest granary in the West. That was what those reports had said, in their bureaucratic way. That was what a scout on a ridge had been sent to confirm. I rang the dinner bell. 40,000 caddies a day, 10,000 hungry men, and a granary that had announced itself to everyone who knew how to read a supply manifest. I hadn't started this, but I had made it visible. Now I had to decide what to do with it. The wall grew faster with Meng Da. Not because he drove people harder. Zhao Yan already drove people as hard as they could go without breaking, but because Meng Da knew which work mattered, and which work was effort spent on the wrong thing. He walked the site every morning before anyone else arrived, sometimes before dawn, with a small oil lamp in his hands, feeling the mortar joints the way a doctor feels a pulse. He would find one or two things that looked correct, but weren't, fix them before the day's work started, and then the day's work built on a foundation that was actually sound. On day 97, he stopped a section of east wall work entirely. I was at the supply ledger with Su Ling when Zhao Yan came to get me. Her expression said, "Come now, this is important, and also, I don't fully understand what's happening." I went. Meng Da was standing at the east wall section with 12 workers around him, all of them looking at a section of foundation trench. He didn't look up when I arrived. He was crouched down, running his fingers along the bottom of the trench. "Clay lens," he said. I crouched beside him. "Show me." He pressed his thumb into the earth at the bottom of the trench. It gave slightly, then held. He moved 6 inches east and pressed again. Same result. 6 inches more. This time his thumb sank 3 finger widths before stopping. "Saturated clay layer," he said. 8 inches down. Runs east for about 4 meters, then stops. He looked at me. "You put wall foundation stones on top of this, they settle unevenly. Maybe not this season, maybe not next, but the third rainy season." "The joint cracks," I said. "The wall falls," he said. "Not all at once, section by section, starting at the weak point." He stood up. "Same problem as the northeast tower, but worse. Because this is a wall section, not a corner. More load per running meter." End quote. I looked at the trench. 4 meters of compromised ground in the middle of my east wall. Fix? 2 options. He held up 1 finger. "Bridge it. Run the foundation stones across the soft section like a lintel. Distribute the load to the firm ground on either side. Takes 3 extra days and about 400 additional bricks." He held up a second finger. "Drain it. Dig a secondary trench parallel to the wall, angled to the east. Draw the water table down below the clay layer before we build. Takes 5 extra days, but solves the problem permanently." "Which do you recommend?" He didn't hesitate. "Drain. Bridge is faster. Bridge is also a compromise you build into a wall that has to stop 10,000 men. Drain it," I said, "and add it to the ledger. I want the time and material cost documented." He nodded and went back to his workers. Calm, unhurried, already explaining the drainage trench design in the patient technical language he used for everything. His workers listened the way people listen to someone who has been right enough times that listening has become habit. I stood there for a moment watching him. 30 years building things. A gate that survived everything except the people around it. He hadn't come here because he heard about the thunder weapons. He'd come because someone told him there was food and a wall being built properly. That was what had reached him through 4 months of refugees and burned villages and roads that weren't safe anymore. A wall being built properly. I went back to Su Ling. She had found the second problem in the requisition order on day 97. The first problem was the seal issue. No authorization seals available from Duan Fei's silent office, which meant technical compliance was impossible without the commissioner's input. She had documented this in a formal response to the county lord steward. 3 pages, precise language, no accusations, just procedural fact. The second problem was more interesting. The order specifies 60 days of stores, she said. Standard category A bales, 40 caddies each. She opened the ledger to a new page. But the order was calculated against the population registration from day 70. Our registered population on day 70 was 214 people. I looked at her, and now we have 376. 376, she confirmed. The imperial minimum daily ration per person, category D standard, the absolute floor, is 4 caddies per day. For 376 people, 60 days of minimum stores is 90,240 caddies. She turned the ledger toward me. The requisition order asks for approximately 50,000 caddies, calculated against the day 70 population. If we surrender that amount, we have less than the imperial minimum ration for our actual current population. She paused. Which means the county lord's requisition order, if complied with at face value, would create a starvation condition in a producing township that the same county lord has a commercial interest in maintaining. I looked at her math. It was exactly right. Of course it was. You've written this up? I said. Formal objection, procedural grounds, addressed to the county lord's administrative office with a copy to the Western Army Supply Liaison. She slid a document across the table. I've asked for a revised calculation based on current registered population. Standard administrative request. Nobody can object to it without admitting they don't want the math corrected. End quote. I read the document. It was beautifully written. The specific beauty of a document that says something devastating in language so correct and so reasonable that arguing against it would require arguing against your own procedures. Su Ling had learned this from watching me work the tribunal documents on the coast. She had taken the principle and applied it here with the instincts of someone who had been thinking in financial structures since she was old enough to sit in her father's counting house. One more thing, she said. Tell me. The requisition order is signed by the county lord, but the supply line it feeds into, the Western Army forward allocation that flows through Duan Fei's commissioner's office. She looked at me steadily. The same office that hasn't responded to zone communications in 4 months. The same office that, according to the allocation ledger you've been carrying since the coast, has been systematically redirecting grain from producing zones for at least 4 years. Yes, I said. If the grain we surrender goes into that supply line, she said, it doesn't reach the army. No, I said. It reaches Duan Fei. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were flat on the table, the way they went when she was thinking through the final step of something. Then the requisition order isn't just bureaucratic overreach, she said. It's the mechanism by which Duan Fei harvests producing zones under cover of wartime necessity. She looked up. He doesn't need to send raiders. He sends clerks, and the clerks have legal authority. I looked at her. 6 months ago, she had been a merchant's daughter who hadn't eaten in 3 days. Now she was sitting across from me reconstructing the architecture of a 4-year theft operation from first principles, using nothing but a requisition order and a population ledger. Document it, I said. All of it. Not as an accusation, as an analysis. The kind of analysis a township administrator would produce when trying to understand how to comply correctly with a legitimate order. Ken quote. She nodded. Already writing. Su Ling. She looked up. The war bonds, I said. The plan you drafted last week. The neighboring villages, the 2 to the southwest that have been sending grain deposits for protection. Is that still in motion? Waiting on your approval, she said. The village headmen have both agreed in principle. Grain deposits in our storage in exchange for a protection guarantee and a fixed-rate redemption when the threat passes, equivalent to what they'd pay a mercenary company, but paid in grain instead of silver. She paused. It also means their grain is here, under our roof, documented as a deposit rather than a surrender, legally distinct from a requisition, which means it's not subject to the requisition order, I said. Which means it's not subject to the requisition order, she confirmed. 2 more villages. Their grain protected in our storage, legally shielded from Duan Fei's requisition mechanism, earning us goodwill and security guarantees in both directions. The compass. I didn't have a compass here, not the brass one, not the thing my grandfather had given me on the coast. But I felt the same thing I had felt when the needle had confirmed the salt flats. The recognition that the next right move had been found, not given. That I had worked out the answer myself. Approve it, I said. Wen Shu arrived on day 99. He came alone, on foot, wearing a clerk's robe that had been good quality 6 months ago and was now covered in the specific pattern of grime that comes from sleeping rough. He had a satchel across one shoulder and the expression of a man who has been building up to something for a long time and has finally run out of reasons not to do it. He asked at the gate for the township elder. Zhao Yan brought him to me at the wall site. She stayed close. She always stayed close with new arrivals she hadn't vetted yet, but her hand was off her weapon, which meant she'd assessed him as cautious rather than dangerous. Wen Shu, he said. Former allocation clerk, Imperial Supply Commissioner's Office, Western Regions. He looked at me steadily. Duan Fei's office. I worked there for 7 years. I looked at him. He looked back, not nervous, exactly, resolved. The look of someone who has made a decision and is now on the other side of it. Why are you here? I said. Because you're the only person in this zone who's been documenting the allocation discrepancies, he said. I don't know how you got the numbers you have, I don't know how you found the pattern, but someone in this settlement has been building a case against Duan Fei, and that case has gaps. He opened his satchel and produced a stack of documents, thin paper, dense columns of numbers, official commissioner's office formatting. I can fill them. I looked at the documents without touching them. Why now? I said. Why not 6 months ago? A year ago? He was quiet for a moment. Because 6 months ago, nobody was building anything. Everyone was surviving. There was nowhere to bring this. He looked at the wall going up behind me, the organized movement of workers, the settlement that had grown from a cliff and 9 days of rations into something real. There is now. Zhao Yan was watching him with the particular attention she gave people she was still deciding about. What's in the documents? I said. 7 years of internal allocation manifests, he said. Not the official records, the working documents, the ones that show what was authorized before it was downgraded. The ones that show the downgrade orders, who signed them, when, and the parallel documents that show where the redirected grain went instead. Include. He paused. Including the last 4 months. Including the current wartime requisition cycle. 4 months of wartime requisition records. Current cycle. Duan Fei had been running the same scheme during the war emergency. While 10,000 barbarians marched south and townships scrambled to fill imperial supply quotas, Duan Fei had been skimming the quotas, the requisition order, the grain that would be surrendered by every producing zone in the western counties. All of it flowing through his office, all of it subject to the same downgrade and redirect pattern he had been running for years, now operating under wartime authority, with wartime urgency and wartime cover. Sit down, I said. He sat. Su Ling, I called. She appeared from the administrative building doorway. She looked at Wen Shu, then at the documents on the table. Her eyes went to the column headers and she read them the way she read everything. Fast, total, not missing anything. When did you leave Duan Fei's office? She said. 12 days ago, Wen Shu said. Does he know you took these? He knows I'm gone. He may not know what I took. He will know within the month, when he can't find the working documents for the autumn requisition cycle. Which means we have less than a month before he starts looking for them specifically, Su Ling said. She looked at me. These need to be copied and distributed before then. If the originals are here and he sends people to retrieve them, multiple copies, I said. Same system as before. One set stays here, one goes to the trading post at Aldenvane, one goes with the next provincial messenger heading to the capital. I looked at Wen Shu. You're willing to be named as the source? He met my eyes. I've been deciding that for 7 years, he said. Yes. Quartermaster's report, day 99. Registered dependents, 377. Spatial farm output, 377 units. Cycle vitality debt, 377 days. New dependent registered, 1. Wen Shu, former imperial clerk. Host acknowledged cost, 1 day. I registered him without hesitation. That evening, the three of us, me, Su Ling, and Wen Shu, sat at the administrative table with Wen Shu's documents spread across it and went through them section by section. Su Ling led. She had the instinct for this kind of material, the ability to move through columns of numbers and see the shape they made, the way a gap in an expected pattern jumped out at her before she had consciously identified what was wrong. She pointed. Wen Shu explained the internal context. I cross-referenced against the allocation ledger I had been carrying since the harbor master's office on the coast, checking whether the patterns matched. They matched. Every entry in my ledger that I had documented from the harbor master's records, the 4-year pattern of authorized, then downgraded, then missing allocations, corresponded to something in Wen Shu's internal documents. Not just the pattern, the specific entries, the same authorization codes, the same downgrade signatures. Duan Fei's signature. He signed every downgrade personally, Wen Shu said. For the first 2 years, he used a junior clerk's authorization to create deniability. The clerk died in the 2nd year. Fever. After that, he started signing them himself. I don't know if he became careless or if he decided nobody would ever see these documents. He became confident, Su Ling said quietly. Carelessness and confidence look the same from the outside, but they come from different places. She turned a page. A careless man forgets to cover his tracks. A confident man doesn't think he needs to. Which means the cover is incomplete, but the evidence is complete, I said. The evidence is comprehensive, she said. 7 years plus the 4 years from your coast records. 11 years of the same pattern, documented from 2 independent sources, Tune Oat 1. She looked up. If this reaches the right authority, it will, I said. She looked at me. I know who the right authority is, I said, and I know how to get it there. I paused, but not until the wall is finished. Not until the horde question is resolved. If I send this to the capital now, Duan Fei gets wind of it, and the first thing he does is accelerate the wartime requisition. He empties every producing zone in the western counties before anyone can stop him, and we lose everything we've been building. I looked at the documents. We hold this until we're in a position where he can't burn the evidence by burning us. Wen Shu was watching me carefully. You've done this before, he said. Something like it, I said. You're not just a farmer, he said. I'm a logistics officer, I said. Or I was. I looked at the documents. File everything in order. Su Ling will show you the system. I want 6 copies made by the end of the week. He nodded and started organizing. I stepped outside. The night was cold and clear. The wall's north section rose against the dark sky. Meng Da's corrected foundation. Zhao Yan's crew, 3 days ahead of the revised schedule. The fields were producing. The spatial farm was running at 377 units a cycle. The war bonds from the 2 neighboring villages had been agreed, and the grain was arriving tomorrow. 26 days until the horde's minimum arrival estimate. I ran the numbers. Wall completion, 28 days at current pace, maybe 26 with Meng Da's efficiency. Tight, very tight. Dependent count, 377. Spatial farm feeding everyone. Grain stores plus war bond deposits plus current production. Enough for the population, and then some. Evidence, comprehensive, documented. 6 copies by end of week. Duan Fei, unaware of Wen Shu's defection for approximately 3 more weeks. The county lord's requisition, stalled on procedural grounds, formally documented, mathematically demonstrating that compliance as written would create a starvation condition in a township the county lord himself had a financial stake in. Everything was moving. I looked north. Somewhere out there, 10,000 hungry people were marching toward the richest granary they had ever heard of, and the richest granary they had ever heard of had announced itself through my own supply reports, my own production records, my own documented surplus that had been so impressive that it had filtered up through the county lord's reports and into Duan Fei's manifest system and come out the other end as a destination for a starving horde. I rang the dinner bell. I had known it would come to this. Not the specifics, not Beitor's clan markings or Torgal's ridge observation or the precise arithmetic of 40,000 caddies a day, but the general shape of it. Build something real and visible, and the world notices. The world noticing brings problems. The problems are the cost of having built something worth noticing. I had built it anyway. Now I had to decide what the dinner bell meant. Not fight, not hide, not surrender the granary and watch Duan Fei skim it. Something else. I went to find Zhao Yan. She was at the training ground. Night drills, she ran them twice a week now. Torchlight formation exercises that her militia endured with the grim focus of people who had heard the numbers and understood what was coming. 20 trained, 12 part-trained. 32 people moving through defensive formation drills in torchlight, their breath fogging in the cold air. She saw me coming and held up her hand. The formation stopped. I waited until she walked to me. The horde, I said. Tell me what you know about Beitor. She was quiet for a moment. This was a different kind of quiet than her usual silence. Older. My father fought Beitor's father, she said. Different clan, same family line. The Iron Grass clan has been pushing south since before I was born. Not because they want our land, because their land. She stopped. Their grazing land has been shrinking for 40 years. Climate, overgrazing, some of both. They move south, because staying north means dying slowly. She looked at me. Beitor didn't unite 4 clans because he's ambitious. He united them because 4 clans together can eat. 1 clan alone can't. He's a provider, I said. She looked at me. He did for his people what I've been doing here, I said. He found a way to feed them that 1 man alone couldn't find. He just found a different method. His method burns things, she said. Because his method doesn't have a spatial farm, I said. Or a water wheel. Or Su Ling. She was quiet for a long moment. What are you thinking? She said. I'm thinking that 10,000 hungry people are not the same thing as 10,000 people who want to fight, I said. Beitor kept them together by promising food at the end of the march. What happens if the food is there, and the fight isn't necessary? You want to feed the horde, she said. Flat, not a question. I want to split it, I said. The hungry from the ambitious. The people who followed Beitor because they were starving from the people who followed him because they want to burn things. I looked at her. If I can feed the hungry ones before they reach the wall, some of them stop marching. If enough of them stop marching, the horde loses mass, she said slowly. A horde that is 10,000 is a military force. A horde that is 6,000 is a raiding party. A horde that is 3,000 is a problem Mengda's wall can handle. Yes, I said. She looked at the training ground, at her 32 people in the torchlight. It might not work, she said. No, I agreed. And if it doesn't work, we need the wall finished, and every one of those 32 people ready to hold it. Yes, I said. Both things have to be true at the same time. The feeding plan and the defense plan, neither one instead of the other. She thought about this for a long time. The feeding posts, she said, forward positions outside the wall. Where? North Road, 3 positions, each 2 days march apart. Small teams. Enough food to feed the stragglers. The ones who are falling behind. The ones who are weakest. The ones who a military commander would already consider liabilities. I looked at her. Beitor's logistics problem is that he can't slow down for the weak ones without losing momentum. If the weak ones can stop and eat and survive without him, he loses 3,000 mouths that are eating his March ration, she said. She was working through it now, the tactical mind her father had built, taking the logistics framework I was offering and turning it into something she could use. And 3,000 bodies that aren't going to fight anyway. His effective force shrinks before it reaches us. His supply demand shrinks. His momentum shrinks. And he arrives at a wall he can't breach, I said, with a reduced force that isn't fully committed, facing an opponent who has been feeding his stragglers for a week. I paused. At that point, what does Batcher do? She looked at me. He talks, she said. A military commander who has lost a third of his force before the engagement, whose remaining force is watching the enemy feed their own people, who is looking at a wall that held. She stopped. He talks. Yes, I said. This only works if the wall holds, she said. The wall will hold, I said. Mengda is fixing the east section foundation tomorrow. In 26 days it's complete. She looked north, the same direction I had looked. If I'm wrong about the wall, I said, we fight. 32 people on a finished wall is not 40 against 10,000. It's a defensible position with a tactical advantage against a force whose momentum we've already degraded. And if you're wrong about Beitor talking, then we have a problem, I said. But it's a smaller problem than 10,000. She was quiet for a long time. My father would have called this reckless, she said. What would you call it? She looked at the wall. At Mengda's corrected foundation, the dressed stone rising in the torchlight. At the training ground where 32 people were doing what she had trained them to do. At the fields beyond, invisible in the dark but real, producing. I would call it the only plan that might actually work, she said. Then she turned back to her militia. Formation Delta, she called. Night perimeter drill, move. The feeding posts took 2 days to set up. Not because the logistics were complicated. I had been running supply operations for 6 months, and Su Ling had the system memorized well enough that she could calculate ration quantities in her sleep. The 2 days were because Zhao Yan refused to approve the forward positions until she had personally walked each site, tested the sightlines, confirmed the retreat paths, and satisfied herself that the teams we sent out could get back inside the wall if things went wrong. She walked all 3 sites, 12 hours of travel. She came back on the evening of day 101 with mud on her boots and a revised position for the second post that moved it 40 meters east onto slightly elevated ground. From the original position, she said, a mounted rider can close the distance to the feeding team in under 30 seconds. From the revised position, the ground slopes enough that the horses slow. Team has 45 seconds to reach the retreat path. She looked at me. 15 seconds is the difference between getting everyone back and losing someone. I approved the revised position. Who goes? I said. Not soldiers, she said immediately. Soldiers at a forward feeding post signal military intent. Beitor's scouts will read it wrong. She thought for a moment. Women. Older men. People who look like what they are. People distributing food. 2 per post. With a fast runner who stays back on the retreat path. If anything looks wrong, the runner comes back. The 2 at the post follow. May, I said. May, the woman who had arrived with her 2 children on day 7 of the Eastern River operation, 3 months ago now, her husband somewhere in the Northern Army. She had become one of Lu Qing's most capable clinic assistants. She was calm under pressure in the way that people become calm when they have already survived things that should have broken them. And old Zhang's wife, if she's willing. She'll be willing, Zhao Yan said. She's been asking for something useful to do since she arrived. 3 teams, 6 people plus runners. I looked at the supply ledger. Ration allocation. I want enough for 200 people per post per day. Grain porridge. Easy to prepare. Easy to eat fast. Nothing that requires people to stop moving for long. If they stop moving, they stop marching, Zhao Yan said. That's the idea, I said. But I don't want anyone at the posts long enough to be questioned or pressured. Food available, eat fast, move on. The posts aren't negotiating positions, they're just food. She nodded. And if Bator sends warriors to the posts instead of stragglers? Warriors eat too, I said. Feed them. Don't ask questions, don't make it political. I looked at her. A warrior who has eaten is harder to convince to fight than a warrior who hasn't. Even if he ate our food, even if it makes it complicated for him, a full stomach thinks differently than an empty one. She looked at me for a moment. You learned that from the spatial farm, didn't you? She said. Not a question, an observation. I learned it from my wives, I said. You fed Perrin and Goss on the cliff, and they've never questioned an order since. She was quiet. Then, that was different. Was it? She didn't answer. But she approved the feeding post plan without further objection. Lu Qing found me at the north wall on day 102. She came in the early morning, before the work crews arrived, when the site was quiet except for Meng Da, who was always there first, always with his lamp, always feeling the mortar joints. She stood at the base of the north section and looked up at what it had become, 2.5 meters now, rising clean and solid from Meng Da's corrected foundation. The dressed stone fitted the way he had shown the crew to fit it. No gaps, no compromises. It's real, she said. It's real, I confirmed. She looked at it for a moment longer. Then she turned to me, and I could see that the wall wasn't why she had come. Sit down, she said. I sat on a supply crate. She stood in front of me and looked at my face with her one good eye in the way she looked at patients, not examining me exactly, reading me. When did you last sleep a full night? She said, I sleep. That's not what I asked. I thought about it. Day 94 maybe. Before the scout report. Before the quartermaster's report had shown me the vitality debt number in plain figures. 8 days, I said. She made a small sound that wasn't quite disapproval. Your hands are shaking, she said. Not much, but I can see it. And you've been eating less than your allocation for at least a week. Su Ling noticed, and she mentioned it to me. Su Ling tracks everything. Yes, Liu Qing said. That's why I trust her numbers. And her numbers say you've been under-eating by about 1/3 for 8 days. She crouched down so her eye was level with mine. Chen Wei, tell me what's actually happening. I looked at her. 6 months. She had been with me since the beginning. Since the cliff, since the 11 fish, since the salt pan confirmation, and the harbor master's logs, and Harvin's ledger cold against my chest. She had held my hand in the smoke after the first cannon fire without saying anything because she knew there was nothing to say. She knew when something was wrong, the way she knew a patient's breathing was off. Not from what they said, from what they didn't. The vitality cost, I said. She was still. Every person I register as a dependent costs me 1 day, I said. The spatial farm scales with registered dependents, but the scaling isn't free. I've been carrying 377 days of debt since day 99. I paused. Meng Da's group was 64 days. Wen Shu was 1. Every person we've taken in since the coast has been... How long have you known? She said. Her voice was very careful. Since the war tier activated, I said. Day 94. That's 9 days ago. Yes. You've been carrying this for 9 days. I didn't want to. I stopped. The feeding posts. Wen Shu. The wall. There was no good time to... Chen Wei. She said my name the way she said it when she had made a decision and was implementing it. The feeding posts are going to register more dependents. Yes. How many? I don't know. If the plan works, if we split a significant portion of the horde, potentially several hundred, maybe more. I looked at the wall. Every person who stops at a feeding post and decides not to march anymore has to go somewhere. If they come here, if I register them, hundreds of days, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a long time. The morning light was coming over the ridge, turning the wall gold and pale, and Meng Da was still crouching at his mortar joints with his lamp, and somewhere in the fields the spatial farm was cycling through its 377 unit output. What does the debt mean? she said. Specifically, what does losing those days feel like? I don't know yet, I said honestly. The system cost is stated as vitality reduction. I don't know if that means years off my life, or illness, or something else. I've been trying to. I stopped. I've been trying not to think about it too carefully. She looked at me for a long moment. That's the part that worries me most, she said. Not the debt, the fact that you've been not thinking about it. She stood up. You are going to eat your full allocation today and sleep tonight. Not negotiate with me about this. Just do it. The plans will still be plans tomorrow, she said. You are not useful to anyone at 2/3 capacity, especially not to the 377 people whose lives depend on decisions you make. She looked at me steadily. I need you at full function. So does Zhao Yan, even if she'd never say it. So does Su Ling. She paused. So do I. I looked at her. Eat, she said. Sleep. Tomorrow you tell me everything about this cost, and we figure it out together. Not alone, together. She held my gaze. That is not a request. You sound like Zhao Yan, I said. Good, she said. Zhao Yan is usually right. She walked back toward the clinic. Halfway there, she stopped without turning around. Chen Wei. Yes. The 377 days, she said. I know you'd do it again. Every single one. She paused. So would I. But do it knowing it's a cost, not pretending it isn't. She kept walking. I sat on the supply crate for a while after she left. Meng Da looked up from his mortar joint. He had heard everything, probably. His face didn't show it. Wall's good, he said. Northeast corner is holding true. If you want to check the drainage trench progress on the east section, I'll show you after the morning crew arrives. Thank you, Meng Da, I said. He went back to his lamp. Kyra arrived on day 105. She came under a flag of truce, a white cloth tied to a straight branch, carried in her left hand, her right hand visible and empty. She came alone, on foot, from the north road. She walked past the first feeding post without stopping. The team there reported she had looked at the operation with careful attention, said nothing, and kept moving south. Zhao Yan met her at the gate. I watched from inside. The woman was younger than I expected. Late 20s, maybe younger. She had the build of someone who had grown up moving. Not a soldier's build, not a farmer's build, but the lean, balanced posture of someone who had been riding and hiking and making fast decisions in variable terrain since childhood. Her hair was braided back in the northern style. She carried no visible weapons, which Zhao Yan noted with the slight narrowing of eyes that meant she was assuming hidden ones. They spoke at the gate for several minutes. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the body language. Kyra was direct without being aggressive. She said what she was there to say and waited. Zhao Yan listened with her arms at her sides, which was her neutral posture, which meant she hadn't found a reason to be alarmed yet. Then Zhao Yan brought her in. Chen Wei, Zhao Yan said. This is Kyra. She is Beitor's niece. I looked at Kyra. Kyra looked at me. You are the Thunder Lord, she said. Her imperial language was accented but fluent. The man who feeds people at the road. One of my people's ideas, I said. Sit down. She sat. Zhao Yan remained standing. I sat across from Kyra. You came ahead of the horde, I said. I came instead of the horde, she said. For now. She placed her hands flat on the table, both visible. My uncle sent me to assess what we are marching toward. He has heard different things. Thunder weapons, a walled settlement, feeding posts on the road. She looked at me directly. He wants to know which is true. All of it, I said. She absorbed this without visible reaction. He also wants to know why you feed his people before he arrives. Because hungry people who have eaten make better decisions than hungry people who haven't, I said. And I would prefer that everyone makes good decisions in the next 20 days. She studied me for a moment. That is either very wise or a military tactic. Both, I said. The same way your uncle uniting 4 clans was both genuinely about feeding his people and also made him significantly more powerful. Good strategy and good intention aren't opposites. Something shifted in her expression. Not suspicion exactly. Recalibration. The trade routes, she said. The northern grain routes that were closed 4 years ago. Do you know who closed them? Duan Fei, I said. Imperial Supply Commissioner, Western Regions. He closed the northern trade routes to create artificial scarcity in the border zones, which gave him grounds to requisition grain from producing townships at below market allocation and sell it privately. Your clans couldn't buy grain through legitimate channels because the channels were deliberately closed. I paused. That's why your uncle's people are hungry. Not because the South doesn't have grain. Because someone with imperial authority made sure it couldn't reach you. Kyra was very still. You know this, she said. You can prove this. I have 11 years of documented allocation records, I said. 2 independent source sets, currently being copied for distribution to the appropriate imperial authority. I met her eyes. Duan Fei is the reason 10,000 people are marching south in a famine season. He is not my problem, and he is not your uncle's problem. He is the problem we have in common. She looked at the table for a long moment. When she looked up, something had settled in her face. The assessment was complete. She had come to learn what kind of person she was dealing with, and she had learned it. What do you want from my uncle? She said. A conversation, I said, not a battle. A conversation about what happens after Duan Fei is removed and the northern trade routes reopen, about what a functional supply relationship between the northern clans and the western producing zones could look like, and quaint. I paused. Your people need grain. We produce grain. That is not a conflict. That is a transaction waiting to happen. My uncle will say his warriors have marched 40 days, she said. They expect a conquest. You cannot feed 10,000 people an idea. No, I said, but I can feed them, and I can show them that what I have here is worth more to them intact than burned. I looked at her. A granary that produces indefinitely is worth more than a granary you take once and empty. She was quiet for a long time. My uncle is not unreasonable, she said finally. He has done unreasonable things because reasonable options were not available. She paused. If reasonable options become available, that depends on the conversation, I said, which is why I'm asking for one. She looked at Zhao Yan. Zhao Yan looked back at her with the expression she used for people she was still deciding about. Not hostile, waiting. I will carry your request to my uncle, Kyra said. I cannot promise his answer. I can promise that I will represent what you've said accurately. She paused. He respects accuracy. It is one of the few things that reliably gets through to him. Then tell him accurately, I said. She stood. Zhao Yan moved to escort her out. At the door, Kyra stopped. The feeding posts, she said without turning. The people who stopped there, they're not going to march again. I know, I said. How many do you think that is? I don't know yet, I said honestly. But enough that the math changes before your uncle arrives. She thought about this. He will know the math has changed, she said. He runs numbers the same way you do. It is the family trait, apparently. She looked at me over her shoulder. He will know what the feeding posts meant and why you built them. He is not someone you can surprise into a decision. Good, I said. I don't want to surprise him. I want to reason with him. She nodded once and left. Zhao Yan came back after a minute. Well, I said. She's not a soldier, Zhao Yan said. But she's not soft. She came here to take a full account of what we are, and she did it completely. She paused. Her hands have calluses on the inside of the left thumb and the right index finger. Writing calluses, I said. She's a recorder, Zhao Yan said. Her uncle's recorder. Everything she saw here goes into a detailed report. She looked at me. He'll know the wall dimensions. He'll know the cannon positions. He'll know the feeding post operation and the clinic and the grain stores. Good, I said. Zhao Yan looked at me. You wanted her to see all of it, she said. You didn't restrict her access. No. Why? Because a man who knows exactly what he's facing makes a rational decision based on what he sees, I said. And what she's going to report is a walled settlement with thunder weapons, a functioning food production operation, feeding posts already degrading his force, and a township elder who is offering a trade relationship instead of a fight. I paused. Beitor is a provider. He has been providing for his people through conquest because other options weren't available. I'm offering him another option. I looked at the wall. But he has to see that the option is real, not claimed, real. Zhao Yan was quiet, and if he decides the rational choice is still to fight, she said, then the wall holds and we find out if my cannon production has kept pace with Meng Da's schedule, I said. She made a sound, not quite a laugh, the closest she usually got. Quartermaster's report. Day 106. Registered dependents, 377. Spatial farm output, 377 units. Cycle vitality debt, 377 days. Feeding post activity. Day 1 Tring. Estimated stragglers fed, 340. Approximate non-continuation rate, 60 to 65%. Dependents not yet registered, pending. Wall status, north section 87% complete. East section drainage trench operational. Projected completion, Day 121. Horde estimated arrival. Day 124-129. Margin, 3 to 8 days. I read the feeding post numbers twice. 340 people in 3 days. 60 to 65% not continuing the march. That was 200 people who had stopped, who were sitting at the roadside or in the nearest shelter eating grain porridge and making the calculation that Zhao Yan had described, the calculation about whether the rest of the march was worth it. 200 people in 3 days. The margin was improving, but 200 people who stopped marching were, eventually, 200 people who needed somewhere to go. They couldn't stay at a feeding post. They couldn't go back north. There was nothing north to go back to, which was why they had marched in the first place. They would come here, and every one of them I registered was another day. I closed the report and went to find Lu Qing. She was at the clinic, reorganizing the medicine stores with the methodical precision she brought to everything. She heard me coming and didn't look up. "You ate this morning," she said. "I ate this morning," I confirmed. "And last night?" 6 hours. She looked up now. "That's better than 8 days ago." "It's a work in progress," I said. I sat down across from her work table. "The feeding posts are working. 200 people have stopped marching in 3 days. She looked at me. She understood what that meant. "They'll come here," she said. "Yes." "And you'll register them?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, sorting dried herbs with her careful hands. Chamomile, wild ginger, the sweet wormwood she had been cultivating in quantities that had grown steadily since I had started providing her with spatial farm output. "Then we prepare for them," she said. "More clinic space, more medicine stores. I need to train 2 more assistants this week. May and one of the women from Meng Da's group who has been helping at the clinic. If 200 people arrive, I need to be able to process them medically in under a day, not 3 days." She picked up a bundle of dried herbs and set it precisely in its place. "What's the registration timeline?" "I don't know exactly when they'll arrive," I said, "but I'd estimate the first group in 5 to 7 days. Then I have 5 days," she said. "That's enough if I start today." She stood up and moved toward the door. "Lu Qing," I said. She stopped. "The cost," I said. "Every person I register. I wanted you to know, not to change anything, but I wanted you to know." She turned around. "I know," she said. "I've known since you told me on day 94, and probably before that, honestly." She held my eyes. "Chen Wei, do you know why I trust you with this?" I waited. "Because you told me," she said. "The moment you knew, you told me. Not immediately. You carried it 9 days first, which I'm still angry about. But you told me." She paused. "Men who are doing something wrong hide the cost. Men who are doing something right show you the cost and then pay it anyway." She looked at me steadily. "I have never once questioned whether you were doing the right thing. I've only ever questioned whether you were going to break before you finished doing it." I looked at her. "Are you?" she said. "Going to break?" "No," I said. "Good," she said, and walked out to prepare her clinic for 200 new patients. The first group arrived on day 109, 83 people. Families mostly, the same composition as Tosker's group from the Eastern River days. Children at roughly a third, working-age adults at half, elderly at the remainder. They came down the North Road in the early afternoon, led by a man who walked with a slight limp and had the look of someone who had been making decisions for his group since before he was ready to. His name was Rook. He was 31 years old. He had been a cattle herder before the grazing land gave out. He had 4 people who were his direct family and 79 who had attached to him on the march because he seemed like he knew where he was going. He had not known where he was going. He had followed the feeding posts south and hoped the south had something worth reaching. He stood at our gate and looked at the wall, Meng Da's wall, nearly complete now, dressed stone rising 3 meters, the corner towers at full height, and then looked at me. "Is this it?" he said. "This is it," I said. He turned and said something to the people behind him. I didn't need to understand the northern dialect to read the response that moved through the group, the same response I had heard from Tosker's people at Eastern River, the sound of people who had been moving toward something uncertain and have arrived and found it real. "We work," Ruck said. "Whatever work you have." "I have work," I said. I registered all 83 of them that evening. Quartermaster's report. Day 109. Registered dependents, 460. Spatial farm output, 460 units cycle. Vitality debt, 460 days. New dependents registered, 83. Host acknowledged cost. Feeding post activity, days 1 to 6. Total stragglers fed, 890. Non-continuation rate, 67%. Estimated March attrition, 600 persons. Horde estimated effective force, 9,400. Down from 10,000. 83 more days. 600 people who weren't marching anymore. I acknowledged the cost and closed the report. On day 111, Su Ling brought me a document I hadn't been expecting. Not from Wen Shu's records, not from the requisition order correspondence. Something new. The county lord's steward came this morning, she said. While you were at the wall site. She placed the document on the table. The county lord wants to meet, in person. Here, she paused. He's coming tomorrow. I looked at the document. Standard administrative request. County lord's seal. Formal, but not threatening. He wants something, I said. Yes, she said. And I think I know what. She opened her ledger to a page she had prepared. The requisition order I challenged on population grounds and the seal authorization grounds, he hasn't been able to force compliance, and he hasn't been able to dismiss the challenge without admitting his own administrative error. She looked at me. But he also has a war coming at his territory's northern border. And the only fortified position between his county seat and the Horde's approach vector is us. End quote. I looked at her. He needs us, I said. He needs us, she confirmed. And he knows it, which means tomorrow's meeting is not him coming to demand compliance with the requisition order. She paused. It's him coming to negotiate. I thought about the war bond proposal. The two neighboring villages already in the consortium, a county lord who came to negotiate instead of demand, was a county lord I could offer a different kind of arrangement. The war bond consortium, I said, if he joins as a shareholder, he becomes financially dependent on our continued operation, she said. He can't enforce the requisition order against an operation he has a financial stake in maintaining. She tilted her head. And as the largest single stakeholder in the consortium, he gets formal protection under his own county authority, which means Duanfei's requisition mechanism has to go through him first. Using the county lord as a procedural shield against Duanfei, I said. Using the county lord's own financial interest as a procedural shield, she corrected. He's not doing it for us. He's doing it for himself. We just have to make sure his interests and ours point in the same direction. She had been thinking about this since the requisition order arrived. Probably before that. The entire war bond structure, I realized, had been designed with this meeting in mind. She had built the mechanism and waited for the county lord to arrive at the moment when his need made him receptive to it. Su Ling, I said. She looked up from the ledger. You planned this, I said. From the beginning. She looked at me with the slight lift at the corner of her mouth that was her version of a full smile. I plan everything, she said. You know that. The county lord arrives tomorrow, I said. Make sure the meeting room is ready. Already arranged, she said, and closed the ledger. The county lord arrived at midday. Not with 20 guards this time. With 8. And not in a carriage. On horseback. Which meant he had come fast and hadn't wanted the delay of road quality checking that carriage travel required. He was a practical man when circumstances required it. Circumstances currently required it. His name was Lord Fen Zhao. I had dealt with him 3 times before. The original township deal, the brick contract renegotiation, and the land grant formalization after Chen Bao. Each time he had arrived with the confidence of a man who controlled the terms of every conversation he entered. Today he arrived with the look of a man who knew he didn't. He dismounted in the yard and looked at the wall. The north section was complete now, finished 2 days ahead of Meng Da's revised schedule, because Meng Da had found an efficiency in the corner tower construction that saved a full day per tower, and he had applied it quietly without announcing it, the way he did everything. The east section was 3/4 done. The full perimeter would close in 9 days. Lord Fen Zhao looked at the wall for a long time. Then he looked at me. Township Elder Chen Wei, he said, you have been busy. The situation required it, I said. Welcome, my lord. Please come inside. I had set the meeting room up the way I always set it. Table centered, documents organized, nothing decorative, everything functional. Su Ling was already seated at the far end with her ledger. Zhao Yan was standing at the door with the particular quality of stillness that meant she was present as a statement rather than a guard. You didn't need to guard a room that contained Zhao Yan. You just needed Zhao Yan. Lord Fen Zhao sat. His 8 guards stayed outside. He looked at Su Ling, at Zhao Yan, at the organized document stacks, and then at me. The requisition order, he said, is procedurally complicated, I said. As Su Ling's formal response documented, but that's not why you're here. He looked at me. You're here, I said, because the horde is 13 days out and your county seat is 30 li south of this wall, which means if this wall fails, the horde reaches your seat in a day and a half. I paused. And if this wall holds, your seat is protected by a fortified position you didn't have to build or pay for. He was quiet for a moment. A careful man, Lord Fenjiao. He didn't fill silences with noise. What do you want? He said. The same thing you want, I said. The horde to not destroy this county. After that, a functional relationship between this township and your administration that doesn't involve Duanfei's requisition mechanism taking everything we produce. I looked at him. I have a proposal. Show me, he said. Su Ling opened the ledger. The War Bond Consortium proposal was 12 pages. Su Ling had written it over 3 days, refining it each evening after the day's work was done. It was the most precisely constructed financial document I had seen since my old life, structured as a grain futures agreement with a protection guarantee embedded in the terms, converting what would have been a one-way requisition into a mutual obligation. The core terms: Lord Fen Zhao deposits 400 caddies of grain from his county stores into the consortium. In return, he receives a formal protection guarantee backed by the township's wall and garrison, a fixed-rate redemption after the threat passes, and shareholder status in the consortium's ongoing trade operations. Shareholder status meant ongoing returns from the trading operations Su Ling had built with Silas Marsh and the regional merchants. It also meant that any imperial requisition against the consortium had to be processed through the county lord's administrative office first, because he was a stakeholder, and requisitioning a county lord's assets without his administrative participation was a different legal category than requisitioning a township's assets directly. It put Lord Fenjiao between Duanfei and us, not as our protector, as a man protecting his own investment. Lord Fenjiao read the 12 pages without speaking. He read them slowly, the way a careful man reads a document he intends to either sign or challenge clause by clause. When he finished, he set the document down and looked at Su Ling. You wrote this, he said. Yes, my lord, she said. Where did you learn this structure? From my father's trading contracts, she said, and from watching Township Elder Chen Wei document allocation discrepancies. She paused. The principle is the same. A well-documented obligation is worth more than an undocumented promise in either direction. End quote. He looked at the document again. The shareholder returns. These are real? The trading operation generated 42 silver taels in net income last month, Su Ling said. The month before, 38. The trend is upward as the merchant relationships mature. I can show you the transaction records if you'd like to verify. She produced the transaction ledger without being asked and placed it beside the proposal. He opened it and checked 3 entries at random positions, a trick I recognized as someone checking for consistency rather than reading straight through. The entries were consistent. Of course they were. Su Ling's ledger was always consistent. The requisition order, he said. If I join the consortium, any requisition against consortium assets requires your administrative participation, Su Ling said, because you are a stakeholder. Imperial Supply Protocol doesn't have a mechanism for requisitioning a county lord's private investment without his consent and documentation. She paused. It's not a refusal of the requisition. It's a procedural complexity that gives us time to route the matter through the audit office. Lord Fenjiao looked at her. Then at me. You're building a case against Duanfei, he said. We're documenting procedural irregularities, I said. The audit office will determine what the documentation means. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Duanfei has friends in the capital. He has relationships in the capital, I said. There's a difference. Relationships are built on shared interest. When his operation is exposed, the shared interest disappears. The relationships disappear with it. End quote. I looked at the county lord. You have a financial interest in this consortium. That interest is real regardless of what happens in the capital. It produces income. It produces protection. It doesn't depend on anyone else's relationships, main quote. He looked at the proposal one more time. At the transaction ledger. At the wall outside the window, dressed stone 3 meters high, the east section rising, as we sat here. The horde, he said. What's your actual assessment? 13 days, I said. The wall closes in 9. The feeding posts have reduced effective force by roughly 600, and the attrition is continuing. Kyra, Beitor's niece, his recorder, came as an advance envoy 5 days ago. I've requested a conversation with Beitor before any engagement. I paused. If Beitor is willing to negotiate, The outcome is a trade agreement that opens the northern routes and removes the conditions that created the horde march in the first place. If he's not willing, we have a finished wall, 32 trained defenders, 6 iron cannons, and a degraded attacking force. Lord Fen Zhao absorbed this. You've been planning this since before the scout appeared, he said. I've been planning this since I understood what we had built and what that meant for who would notice, I said. The feeding posts, the Bader conversation, the consortium, these aren't reactions. They're the same approach I've used since the beginning. Build something real. Document everything. Make sure the right people understand what the documentation means. He looked at me for a long moment. You are not what I expected when I made the township deal, he said. What did you expect? A clever farmer, he said. Someone who could build things and manage people. Useful. He paused. Not someone who was building a case that would restructure the imperial supply system for the entire western region. I'm still a clever farmer, I said. The restructuring is a consequence, not the goal. The goal was always to feed people. He looked at the document one final time. Then he picked up the writing brush Su Ling had placed beside the inkstone and signed the consortium agreement. 3 places. He checked each one before signing. Careful to the end, 9 days for the wall, he said, setting down the brush. I'll have my own engineers come look at the east section. 2 of them, they won't interfere with your mason. Just additional eyes on the completion schedule. Meng Da will welcome the review, I said. Which was true. Meng Da welcomed any inspection that gave him the opportunity to show someone what he'd done with the foundation. Lord Fen Zhao stood, looked at Su Ling. The transaction ledger. I'd like a copy. Already prepared, she said, and produced it from beneath the table. He took it, nodded once to each of us, and left. Zhao Yan watched him go. Then she looked at me. Biggest dependent yet, she said. Not registered, I said, just allied. She almost smiled. The wall closed on day 119, 2 days ahead of Meng Da's final schedule. His efficiency on the corner towers had compounded. Each section built on the corrections of the previous one, the crew learning Meng Da's methods well enough that by the final east section, they were anticipating his adjustments rather than waiting for them. I stood at the completed perimeter in the early morning and walked it end to end. Stone. Proper stone, dressed and fitted, with Meng Da's deep foundations holding level on all 6 faces. The corner towers at full height with the arrow slit design Zhao Yan had specified, narrow enough to protect a defender, wide enough to cover the approach angles from multiple positions simultaneously. The north gate solid hardwood, banded iron, mounted on stone posts that Meng Da had set 4 feet deep. 240 meters of perimeter, 9 days ahead of the horde's minimum arrival estimate. I stood at the north gate and looked out at the road. The feeding posts were still operating. Day 15 now. Su Ling's running count from the post teams. 2,100 people fed. Non-continuation rate holding at 67%. Estimated March attrition, 1,400 people. The horde that had left its winter camp at 10,000 was arriving at approximately 8,600, 8,600. Still a significant force, still more than we could fight conventionally, but 1,400 fewer than the number that had made the March mathematics work in Beitor's original calculation. I went to find Wen Shu. He was in the records room, where he spent most of his time now, organizing documents with the quiet concentration of a man who had been carrying them for 7 years and was relieved to finally put them in order. He had developed a working relationship with Su Ling over the past 2 weeks. They spent evenings cross-referencing his internal manifests against her formal analysis, building the case document by document. The 6 copies, I said. Status. 5 complete, he said. The 6th is the master copy. I want to go through it one more time before it's finalized. He paused. Su Ling found a discrepancy in the Year 3 manifests yesterday. Not an error in my records. An error in Duan Fei's official logs that contradicts his internal working document. Which means he made a mistake in the cover documentation. He calculated the cover would never be compared against the working documents, I said. Yes, Wen Shu said, because the working documents were never supposed to leave the office. He looked at me. This discrepancy is the cleanest single piece of evidence in the entire set. No interpretation required. The official log says one thing. His own working document says something different. The difference is 4,300 caddies of grain in 1 season. 4,300 caddies. In 1 season. 1 discrepancy. Multiplied across 11 years and 7 zones. Add it to the master copy, I said. Prominently. Front section. Not buried in the appendix. He nodded and went back to his documents. I went to the wall. Kyra returned on day 121. She came with 4 riders this time. Not guards exactly, more like witnesses. People Bator had sent to confirm what she reported rather than escort her. They stayed at the gate. She came in alone. I met her in the meeting room. She sat down and placed her hands flat on the table in the same gesture she had used the first time. Deliberate, both hands visible. "My uncle will meet with you," she said. Something released in my chest that I hadn't fully acknowledged was tight. "When?" I said. 2 days, she said. "He is 2 days north of your position. He will come with 20 riders as formal escort. He asks that you come outside the wall to meet, neutral ground." "I'll come outside the wall," I said. Zhao Yan, who was at the door, made a sound. "With appropriate escort," I said. "Not to Zhao Yan, to Kyra." "He expects that," Kyra said. "He would be suspicious of a man who came alone." She paused. "He has reviewed my full report. He has his own intelligence on the wall construction, the cannon positions, the feeding post operation." She looked at me directly. "He knows what you've built here. He knows the feeding post attrition numbers. He has counted the people who stopped marching." Her expression stayed level. "He is not surprised. He is reassessing." "What is he reassessing?" I said. "Whether conquest is the optimal strategy when the alternative is a functioning supply relationship." She paused. "He is a practical man. You said that already. You were right." She looked at the table. "He lost his father's grazing land to a drought that wasn't his fault. He lost access to the southern grain markets to a supply commissioner's corruption that wasn't his fault. He has spent 6 years doing what was available to him, which was war, because the options that would have let him do something else were deliberately closed." She met my eyes. "You reopened one of those options." He noticed. "The trade route documentation," I said. "Yes," she said. He didn't believe it at first. No one in the northern clans believed that someone in the south actually had documentation of what Duanfei did. She paused. "Then he sent someone to Aldenvane to check if the copies you mentioned were real." I looked at her. "They're real," she said. "The trading post has them." His man read them. 3 hours and he read the whole set. She paused. Bator spent 2 days after that not speaking to anyone. She looked at the table. "You have to understand what that documentation means to him. He has been telling his people for 6 years that the South closed the routes deliberately. Everyone thought he was constructing a justification for the war, including some of his own people." She looked up. "The documentation says he was right." "He was right," I said. "Duanfei closed the routes deliberately. It's in the working manifests, the closure orders, the authorization codes, the parallel documents showing the private sale of the grain that should have flowed north." Kyra was quiet for a moment. "He wants to know what you intend to do with the documentation," she said. "Submit it to the Imperial Audit Office," I said, "through the correct procedural channels, with enough copies distributed widely enough that it can't be suppressed." I paused. "Duanfei is a bureaucrat. He operates through official systems. You defeat him through the same systems with better documentation. And after he's removed," she said, "the roots, who reopens them? That's part of the conversation I want to have with your uncle," I said. "The roots need a formal agreement between the northern clans and the western producing zones. Not an imperial decree. Those can be reversed by the next commissioner. A commercial agreement between the parties who actually produce and consume the grain. Documented, signed, mutually binding." She looked at me. "You're describing a trade treaty," she said. "I'm describing a transaction," I said. "Grain flows north. What flows south in exchange is a separate negotiation, but the flow itself, that's just supply meeting demand. It was always going to be the right answer. Someone just had to stop profiting from preventing it." She was quiet for a long time. 2 days, she said finally. "He will be at the marker stone on the north road, 4 li from your gate, dawn." "I'll be there," I said. She stood, paused. "He will test you," she said. "He tests everyone. He will say something provocative and watch how you respond." She didn't look at me when she said it. "He respects people who don't flinch. He doesn't respect people who perform not flinching. There's a difference." "I know the difference," I said. She nodded and left. Zhao Yan waited until the outer door closed. 4 li outside the wall, she said. "Yes. 20 of his riders. Dawn. 2 days from now, which is 3 days before the Horde's current estimated arrival." "Yes, if it goes wrong." "If it goes wrong, we come back inside the wall and use the cannons," I said. "The wall is finished. The east section held under Meng Da's inspection, and Lord Fenjiao's engineers confirmed it. We are in the strongest defensive position we've been in since this started." I looked at her. But it won't go wrong. Bader came to assess options. He has assessed them. He's doing what a rational provider does when a better option appears. He's finding out if the option is real. And is it? She said, is the trade relationship real? Can we actually supply the northern clans on an ongoing basis? I thought about the spatial farm. 377 registered dependents, scaling with every person I added. 460 units per cycle after Rook's group. The output wasn't infinite, it was bounded by my registered dependents, but it scaled with the population I was responsible for. If I registered northern clan families, if they became dependents in the system, if the spatial farm scaled to include them, the cost would be significant. Days I couldn't calculate yet, but the output would be real. Yes, I said, it's real. Zhao Yan looked at me for a long moment. The way she looked at me when she was deciding whether to push further or accept the answer. She accepted the answer. I'm coming with you, she said, to the meeting. I know, I said. I never considered otherwise. The night before the meeting, I sat with all three of my wives. We were in the main room of the station, the same room I had eaten fish stock in on the first night of the coast, which felt like a different life now, which in many ways it was. The fire was going. Outside, the completed wall stood in the dark. Inside, the four of us were together in the way we were together when something significant was about to happen, and everyone knew it. Lu Qing had made dinner. Not the medicinal porridge or the practical stew. Something careful, rice cooked with the seasonal herbs she had been cultivating for 2 months, slow-braised vegetables, a small amount of the dried fish that had been the first thing we had produced on this coast, and that she still occasionally made when she wanted to mark a moment. We ate without discussing the meeting. Zhao Yan ate fast and then sat back and looked at the fire. Su Ling ate slowly and closed her ledger for once, leaving it on the shelf rather than beside her bowl. Liu Qing ate in small bites and watched all of us with her one good eye in the way she watched things she wanted to remember. After dinner, Su Ling spoke. The vitality debt, she said. I've been calculating it. I looked at her. Liu Qing told me, she said. After you told her, we've been discussing it. She glanced at Liu Qing. 377 days when Rook's group arrived. Plus whatever comes after the meeting. If Bader's people come here, if they register, if the clans attach to the farm output. She had her accounting face on, but underneath it something else. I want to understand the math. The math is that every person I register costs me 1 day, I said. The farm scales to feed them, but the scaling price comes from me. You've been paying it since day 1, she said. Yes? And you'll keep paying it. Yes? She was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her ledger. She had brought it after all. I should have known. And turned to a page she had already prepared. Then we optimize where we can. The people who register should be productive dependents, people whose contribution to the system output exceeds the baseline ration they consume. That maximizes what the farm produces relative to the cost you pay. She looked at me, not as a moral calculation, as an efficiency calculation. You pay the same day for a sick elder as for a master mason. The elder is worth registering, but we should sequence the registrations so that productive dependents come first and build the output base before dependents who need more support than they contribute. I looked at her. You've been thinking about this for 2 weeks, I said. Since Lu Qing told me, she said. You didn't say anything. I was still calculating, she said. I don't say things until I've finished calculating. She met my eyes. Meng Da was right to register immediately. Wen Shu was right. Rook's group, 60% of them are working age, productive, contributing. Right? She paused. The northern clan stragglers from the feeding posts, family groups, mixed productivity, some high-need members. We sequence them after the productive base is built. She looked at the ledger. If Beitor's people come here in any number, we set a registration timeline rather than registering everyone at once. Spread the vitality cost over weeks rather than days. End quote. It was exactly right. It was exactly the kind of thinking I should have been doing and hadn't, because I had been carrying the cost alone without telling anyone who could help me carry it. Su Ling, I said. She looked up. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, she said. Optimize. She closed the ledger. Win tomorrow. Zhao Yan looked at the fire. What she said. Liu Qing looked at me across the table. She didn't say anything. She had already said what she needed to say 2 days ago at the wall, and she didn't repeat herself. But she refilled my bowl without being asked, and that was enough. Dawn came cold and clear. I dressed in the dark, not armor. I didn't own armor, and wearing it to a negotiation was a statement I didn't want to make. Plain coat, good boots, the leather satchel with the documents I needed. The compass. I didn't have the brass one from the coast, but I had something like it. The sense, accumulated over 121 days of building and calculating and paying costs and making decisions, of whether I was pointing in the right direction. I was pointing in the right direction. Zhao Yan was waiting at the gate. She was wearing her sword and her sharpened hoe across her back, and the expression of someone who had made peace with what was about to happen. Beside her was a surprise. Kyra was there. She had stayed the night, apparently, sleeping in the guest quarters Su Ling had arranged without mentioning it to me. She fell into step with us without asking. "You're coming?" I said. "I recorded everything on the way in," she said. "I record everything on the way out." She paused. "And my uncle trusts my presence." "It's useful." I didn't object. The 4-li walk north took an hour at dawn pace. The road was empty. The feeding post at the 2-li mark was quiet. The team there had been told to stand down for the morning. The fields on either side were dormant, waiting for spring, the dark earth holding what it held. The marker stone was an old boundary marker, imperial granite, weathered to the point where the original inscription was mostly illegible. It sat at a bend in the road where the terrain opened up. Flat ground in every direction, nobody could approach unobserved. Beitor was already there. He was mounted, which I hadn't expected. 20 riders behind him, as agreed. He was larger than I had pictured from Kyra's descriptions. Not tall exactly, but substantial. The kind of physical presence that comes from decades of practical use rather than display. He had gray at his temples and a beard that had been trimmed recently. His armor was worn but maintained. He looked at me the way Meng Da had looked at my wall, assessing the foundation before judging anything else. I stopped at the marker stone. Zhao Yan stopped at my right shoulder. Kyra stood slightly apart. Beitor looked at Kyra. She nodded once. He looked back at me. "You're smaller than I expected," he said. His imperial language was accented differently than Kyra's. Older pronunciation, more formal. The language of someone who had learned it from documents rather than conversation. "People keep saying that," I said. Something moved in his face, not a smile, the precursor to one. "The feeding posts," he said. "My people who stopped marching." "Yes," I said. "You knew they wouldn't fight," he said. "You fed the ones who wouldn't fight." "I fed the ones who were hungry," I said. "Whether they would have fought is a separate question." "It isn't," he said. "You knew." He looked at me. "A man who feeds 1,400 of my people before I arrive has decided something about what kind of encounter this is going to be." "Yes," I said. "What did you decide?" "That the problem we share is more important than the conflict we almost had." I said. "Duanfei closed your trade routes. The same man has been stealing from every producing zone in the western counties for 11 years. He created the conditions that sent 10,000 people south in a famine season." I met Beitor's eyes. "You and I are both consequences of his decisions. I think we should be the people who end them." Beitor was quiet. Behind him, 20 riders waited without moving. The dawn light was flat and cold across the marker stone. "Show me the documentation," he said. I opened the satchel and produced the summary document Su Ling had prepared. 12 pages, the pattern distilled into the clearest possible form, the key discrepancies highlighted, the Year 3 working document contradiction that Wen Shu had found placed at the front. I handed it to him. He read it on horseback. His eyes moved fast. Faster than I expected. He turned pages without ceremony. Stopped at the Year 3 discrepancy, looked at it for a long moment, turned to the end. Then he looked at me. 4,300 caddies, he said. "One season." "One of many," I said. "That one is the cleanest, because his own documents contradict each other. The others require cross-referencing 2 sources. The audit office will find them all." "The audit office," he said. "You believe the audit office will act on this?" "I believe the audit office will have no choice once the documentation is in front of them in the correct procedural format," I said, "through the correct channels, with enough copies in enough locations that suppression is impossible." I paused. "I've done this before. Different documentation, same approach. It works when the evidence is complete and the procedure is correct." End quote. He looked at me. "You've done this before," he said. "On the coast," I said. "A supply commissioner running the same scheme. Different zone, same pattern. And that commissioner, suspended pending investigation," I said. "The investigation expanded to 7 zones, including this one." Beitor looked at the document again, then at the road behind me. At the wall visible in the distance, the completed perimeter, the corner towers. My people who stopped marching, he said. Where are they? Some are at the feeding posts. Some have come to the settlement. The ones at the settlement are working and eating. End quote. I paused. They're welcome to stay, or to go north when conditions allow. That's their decision. The ones who stay, he said, they become yours? They become their own, I said. I run a settlement, not a collection operation. People who work here are compensated. People who need medical care receive it. People who want to leave can leave. End quote. I met his eyes. I'm not offering your people a new master. I'm offering them a place where the supply chain works correctly. Beitor was quiet for a long time. The 20 riders didn't move. Zhao Yan didn't move. Kyra was watching her uncle with the careful attention of someone who had watched him make decisions before and knew what the different silences meant. The trade routes, he said finally, what you described to Kyra, a commercial agreement between the clans and the western producing zones. Yes, I said, not imperial mediated. The imperial system is what broke the routes in the first place, I said. A direct commercial agreement between the parties is more stable. It doesn't depend on whoever the next commissioner happens to be. What do we offer in exchange for grain access? That's the negotiation, I said. What do you have that the western zones need? Horses, probably. Certain raw materials from the northern territory. Labor, potentially, for seasonal agricultural work. I paused. That's a longer conversation than we can have at a marker stone at dawn. But the principle is simple. You have things we need, we have things you need. The question is finding the exchange rate that makes both parties better off than they were before. Beitor looked at me for a long moment. Then he dismounted. It was, I realized, the most significant thing that had happened since we arrived. A man who stays mounted in a meeting maintains physical and symbolic elevation. A man who dismounts is making a choice. He walked to the marker stone and held out his hand. Not the imperial formal gesture, just a hand. I shook it. We talk, he said. Not here, not today, when the situation is resolved. He looked at the wall behind me. When Duan Fei is removed and the routes are reopened and there is something concrete to negotiate about. He paused. Until then, my force does not advance past the current position. My people at your settlement stay until they choose otherwise. And you send the documentation to the audit office. Agreed, I said. All of it, he said. Not a selection. Everything. Everything, I said. 6 copies, 5 locations. The audit office receives the complete set. He looked at me one more time. The assessing look. Foundation before everything else. Then he nodded once and turned back to his horse. Kyra fell into step beside me on the walk back. He didn't test you, she said. He tested me when he dismounted, I said. That was the test. She looked at me. Most people don't notice that. I noticed, I said. She was quiet for a moment. He's going to want to meet again, she said. After the audit office acts, he'll want to be in the room when the trade agreement is formalized. She paused. He respects what you've built. He doesn't say that easily. I know, I said. Neither do I. Zhao Yan walked on my other side in silence. After a while she spoke. That's one way to end a war, she said. It's the only way that sticks, I said. Defeating someone with force gives you a defeated enemy. Solving the problem that made them an enemy gives you someone who has a reason to not be an enemy anymore. She thought about this. My father would have agreed with that, she said. In theory, he never had the option in practice. That's the difference between having a system and not having one, I said. The system gives options that shouldn't exist. She looked at me sideways. You're going to explain that to me someday, she said. What the system actually is. Someday, I said. The wall came into view ahead of us. Meng Da's wall. Complete, solid, built on corrected foundations. The corner towers catching the morning light. Behind it, the settlement was waking up. The smoke starting from the cook fires. The first crews moving toward the work sites. 377 registered dependents. 460 fed daily. 2 neighboring villages in the consortium. A county lord whose financial interests now pointed in the same direction as ours. A former imperial clerk with 11 years of documentation. A case that was ready to send. And a horde that was standing down. I looked at the wall. My father would have understood what I had built here. He had said that once, about someone else's father. But it was true here too. The man who had given me a compass and told me it pointed at right decisions, he would have understood every decision I had made on this coast, and on the Eastern River, and at the northern marker stone. Not because the decisions were brilliant, because they were earned. That was the whole thing. That was all it ever was. You figured out the answer. You paid the cost. You built what needed building. And if you were lucky, and you had the right people around you, the wall stood. Duan Fei arrived on day 124. He came with Imperial Guards, 40 of them, proper Imperial Bureau soldiers, not county militia, and a wagon train, and the specific confidence of a man who has decided that a problem has grown large enough to require his personal attention. He came under Imperial Supply Authority, which meant he had the legal power to requisition, seize, and arrest within his jurisdictional mandate. He came to empty my granary. I watched him approach from the North Gate Tower. 40 guards in formation around a covered wagon, 3 empty supply wagons behind, and a man on horseback at the center, wearing the formal robes of an Imperial Supply Commissioner. Even at distance, I recognized the type. Not Beitor's practical substance. Not Lord Fen Zhao's careful calculation. Something smaller and harder. A bureaucrat who had operated without consequence for so long that he had stopped believing consequence was possible. He stopped his column outside the wall. He looked at the wall for a while. I could see him recalculating. The wall wasn't in his intelligence. The reports he'd received, the reports that had gone through his own office, that had told him the richest granary in the West was a producing township ripe for wartime requisition, those reports had described an operation, not a fortress. Now he was looking at 240 meters of dressed stone, 6 corner towers, and a settlement he couldn't simply walk into. He sent a rider forward with a document. I had the document read to me at the gate rather than opening it myself. A small thing, but it meant the reading was witnessed by everyone present. It was a formal seizure order under Wartime Supply Authority, plus an arrest warrant for Township Elder Chen Wei on charges of obstruction of Imperial Supply requisition, harboring enemy combatants, that would be Beitor's people at the settlement, and unauthorized commercial activity in a designated war zone. The harboring charge was the dangerous one. It was technically defensible. I had taken in people who had been marching with an enemy force. In the wrong tribunal, with the wrong framing, that was collaboration. Duan Fei had built his case the way he built everything, through paperwork, with enough legal cover to make it look procedural rather than personal. I sent a response to the gate. Tell the commissioner, I said to the rider, that Township Elder Chen Wei will answer all charges before a proper hearing at the county seat, in the presence of the county lord, who is a stakeholder in the matters under dispute. Tell him that the settlement will not open its gates to an armed force, but will fully cooperate with a formal legal proceeding, Henquate. The rider carried it back. I watched Duan Fei receive it, watched him recalculate again. He had come expecting to seize a granary and arrest a troublesome township elder. Instead, he was being invited to a formal hearing, in front of the county lord, on the record. Everything a man like Duan Fei wanted to avoid. Formal hearings created documentation. Documentation was the one thing his entire operation depended on controlling, but he couldn't refuse. Refusing a formal legal proceeding in favor of a forced seizure against a county lord's stakeholder interest would itself become documentation of a commissioner bypassing legal process to seize assets, the kind of documentation that raised questions. He was trapped by his own preferred mechanism. He operated through official process. Now the official process was being used against him. He agreed to the hearing. 3 days hence. County seat. County lord presiding, with an Imperial Supply Bureau adjudicator to ensure the proceeding met Imperial standards. I sent word to Wen Shu to finalize the master copy. The night before the hearing, the 3 of them came to me, all at once, which meant they had discussed it beforehand and decided. Zhao Yan spoke first, which was itself unusual. She usually let Su Ling lead conversations that involved planning. "We're coming to the hearing," she said. "All 3 of us." I assumed Su Ling, I said. She has the documentation. "All 3, Lu Qing said quietly. I looked at them. Duan Fei is bringing 40 Imperial Guards to a county seat, Zhao Yan said. The hearing is legal, but legal doesn't mean safe. A man who has operated without consequence for 11 years, cornered, with 40 armed men, I want to be in that room. She paused. Not to fight, to be present, so that whatever Duan Fei is calculating, he has to include the fact that I am there. Su Ling presents the financial case, Liu Qing continued. I present the humanitarian one, the settlements fed, the medical care, the difference between what Duan Fei's requisition would have caused and what actually happened. The adjudicator needs to hear that this isn't abstract. Real people ate because the grain stayed here. I looked at Su Ling. I've prepared the full case document, she said. Wen Shu's manifests, my analysis, the year 3 discrepancy, the requisition order math showing his order would have created a starvation condition. 11 years, 2 independent sources, 1 contradiction he can't explain. She paused. But there's something I need to tell you before the hearing. Something I found yesterday. I waited. The falsified head count, she said. I went still. 6 months ago, on the coast, in the early days, before the salt pans were fully producing, when I had 12 men and 9 days of rations, and Harvin's requisition mechanism already draining what little was allocated, I had done something. I had inflated a head count on a supply request, registered 14 dependents when I had 13, to get 1 extra ration allocation to keep my men alive through the gap before the fish started coming in. It was a small falsification, a survival falsification, but it was a falsification, in my own hand, in the official record, and it had followed me through the whole coast operation, into the tribunal against Harvin, into everything since. How did you find it? I said. It's in the cross-referenced records, she said. When I was building the case against Duan Fei, I checked our own documentation for anything he could use against us. It's there. The head count discrepancy from the coast, month 1. 14 registered against 13 actual. She looked at me steadily. Duan Fei doesn't have this yet. But if his people do the same cross-reference I did, they'll find it. And at the hearing, if he produces it, it undermines everything, Zhao Yan said. A man accusing the commissioner of falsifying supply records, who himself falsified a supply record. I looked at the 3 of them. They knew. All 3 of them knew about the thing I had done in the early days on the coast, the thing I hadn't told anyone, the small wrong I had committed to keep 12 men alive. You could have hidden it, I said to Su Ling. You found it in our own records. You could have removed it before the hearing. I considered it, she said, for about 10 seconds. She met my eyes. Then I decided that hiding it would make us the same as Duan Fei. He hides discrepancies. We don't. That's the whole difference between us and him. She paused. So I'm not going to hide it. I'm going to tell you to own it. Own it, I said. At the hearing, she said. Before Duan Fei can produce it, you raise it yourself. You explain it. 14 registered against 13 actual, month 1 on the coast, because Harvin Crest had already stolen your allocation, and the falsification was the only way to keep your men fed until the operation produced. She looked at me. The falsification is real, but so is the reason. Harvin's theft came first. Your survival response came second. When you put them side by side, one of them is a man stealing for profit, Liu Qing said. The other is a man lying to keep people alive. The adjudicator will see the difference, but only if you show it to them yourself, before Duan Fei can frame it his way. I looked at the 3 of them. I falsified that head count, I said. I've carried it for 6 months. I led it into the Harvin tribunal and hoped nobody found it. It worked then. But this time you get ahead of it, Zhao Yan said. You don't hide. You own it, and you move past it before he can use it. That's not weakness. That's control. I thought about the compass, the brass one, on the coast, in the harbor master's office, the way it had confirmed decisions after I'd found them myself. It wasn't here now, but the sense of it was owning the falsification, raising it myself, putting it beside Duan Fei's theft so the difference was visible. That was the right decision. I had found it myself. My wives had helped me find it. That was how it was supposed to work. All 3 of you at the hearing, I said. Su Ling, on the financial case. Liu Qing on the humanitarian. Zhao Yan present as the reason nobody does anything stupid with 40 guards, Zhao Yan said. Yes, I said. Liu Qing looked at me. And you own the head count, she said. Promise me. Before Duan Fei can weaponize it. I promise, I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, satisfied. Su Ling closed her ledger. Then we're ready, she said. The hearing convened at the county seat on the morning of day 127. The hall was an administrative building, not built for tribunals but pressed into service. A long room with a raised platform at one end, where Lord Fenjiao sat beside the Imperial Supply Bureau adjudicator, a thin, precise man named Adjudicator Shu, who had the manner of someone who had reviewed a great many disputes and had learned to reveal nothing until he was ready. Duan Fei sat at one table with 2 advocates and a clerk. His 40 guards were outside. The adjudicator had required it, and Duan Fei had complied. because refusing would have been documentation. I sat at the other table, Su Ling beside me with the case document, Lu Qing beside her, Zhao Yan behind us, standing, still, her presence exactly as calculated. Wen Shu was there too, as a witness, seated to the side, the source of the internal manifests. Duan Fei had looked at him when he entered, and something had crossed his face. He knew now. He knew who had taken the working documents. Adjudicator Shu opened the proceeding. We are convened to hear charges brought by Imperial Supply Commissioner Duan Fei against Township Elder Chen Wei, obstruction of imperial requisition, harboring enemy combatants, unauthorized commercial activity, and to hear counter-documentation submitted by Township Elder Chen Wei regarding supply allocation discrepancies in the western regions. He looked at both tables. Commissioner presents first. Duan Fei's advocate stood. He was good. The practiced fluency of someone who had argued many supply disputes. He laid out the charges cleanly. The requisition order, lawfully issued. The obstruction, the procedural challenges Su Ling had filed, reframed as deliberate delay. The harboring, Beitor's people at the settlement, framed as collaboration with an invading force. The unauthorized commercial activity, the consortium, framed as illegal wartime profiteering. It was a competent case, built on real facts, framed to Duan Fei's advantage. He sat down. Adjudicator Shu looked at me. I stood, and I did the thing my wives had told me to do. Before anything else. Before the case against Duan Fei. Before the documentation. Before I respond to the charges, I said, I want to place something on the record myself. Adjudicator Shu raised an eyebrow. 6 months ago, I said, in the first month of my garrison assignment on the famine coast, I falsified a supply head count. I registered 14 dependents when I had 13 in order to receive 1 additional ration allocation. I did this because the allocation I was legally entitled to had already been stolen by the previous supply commissioner, Harvin Crest, and the falsification was the only way to keep my men alive until our own food production began. I looked at the adjudicator directly. It is a real falsification. It is in the record, in my own hand. I raise it now because it is relevant to these proceedings. I am about to accuse a supply commissioner of falsifying records, and I will not do so while concealing that I once falsified one myself. I paused. The difference, which I will demonstrate, is that Harvin Crest's theft came first, and my falsification was a survival response to it. But the falsification was real. I own it. The room was silent. Duan Fei's advocate had a document half drawn from his stack, the head count discrepancy, I realized. They had found it. They had been holding it to produce at the moment of maximum damage. I had just taken the moment away from them. Adjudicator Shu looked at me for a long moment. That is an unusual way to open a defense, he said. It's the honest way, I said. Which is the entire subject of this hearing. Something shifted in Adjudicator Shu's expression. Not approval. He was too controlled for approval. But recalibration. He had come expecting a supply dispute. He was now dealing with something else. Proceed, he said. Su Ling stood. She presented the case the way she did everything. Total, precise, nothing missing. 11 years of allocation discrepancies. 2 independent source sets. The harbor master's ledger from the coast, and Wen Shu's internal manifests from Duan Fei's own office. The pattern of authorized downgrade redirect. The Year 3 working document that contradicted Duan Fei's official log by 4,300 caddies in a single season. She placed the contradiction in front of Adjudicator Shu. The official log, she said, which Commissioner Duan Fei's office submitted to the Imperial Supply Bureau, states that this allocation was delivered in full. The working document, from the Commissioner's own office, in the Commissioner's own filing system, shows the allocation was reduced by 4,300 caddies before delivery, and the reduction was sold through a private merchant channel documented on the facing page. She looked up. These 2 documents cannot both be true. One of them is the Commissioner's official record. The other is the Commissioner's own working document. The Commissioner authored both. Adjudicator Shu examined the 2 documents side by side. For a long time, Duan Fei's advocate stood. The working document is unverified. Chain of custody. The witness who removed it from the Commissioner's office is present, Su Ling said, and available to testify to its provenance. The document bears the Commissioner's office formatting, the Commissioner's filing codes, and in the case of the downgrade order, the Commissioner's own signature. She paused. The Commissioner can authenticate his own signature, or he can deny it. in which case the Bureau can verify it through 3 independent channels. Either outcome resolves the provenance question. She had learned this too, from the Harvin Tribunal, from watching Wesson ask Harvin to authenticate his own seal. Adjudicator Shu looked at Duan Fei. "Commissioner," he said, "is this your signature?" Duan Fei looked at the document. The same trap Harvin had faced. Deny your own signature in front of an adjudicator who can verify it 3 ways, and the denial becomes its own evidence. Authenticate it, and you've authenticated a document that contradicts your official record. Duan Fei was smarter than Harvin. He saw the trap faster, but he saw it too late. The question had been asked, and hesitation was itself an answer, and adjudicator Shu was watching him hesitate. "It appears to be my signature," Duan Fei said. "Though the context," Su Ling said, "is on the facing page, the private sale of the reduced allocation, documented in the same hand." Adjudicator Shu turned the page. He read the facing page. Then he set the document down and looked at Duan Fei with an expression that had finally stopped concealing anything. Lu Qing stood. She spoke quietly, but the room had gone quiet enough that quiet was sufficient. "I am the medical officer of the settlement," she said. "I want to tell the adjudicator what the commissioner's requisition order would have caused, and what actually happened instead." She looked at adjudicator Shu. The requisition order demanded 60 days of grain stores, calculated against a population count that was 4 months out of date. Complied with as written, it would have left the settlement with less than the imperial minimum ration for its actual population, 376 people, including 83 refugees who arrived starving from the north, and 63 from a mason's column, and the original settlers who came with nothing. She paused. "I treat these people. I know their names. The requisition order would have starved them, in a producing township, during a wartime emergency, so that the grain could flow into a supply line, that this documentation shows the commissioner was skimming." She looked at Duan Fei. Instead, the grain stayed. The people ate. The settlement fed 1,400 of the enemy's own people on the road, and reduced an invading force without a battle. She looked back at the adjudicator. That is the difference between what the commissioner's order would have caused and what actually happened. "I wanted it on the record that the difference was measured in human lives." End quote. The room was silent. Adjudicator Shu looked at the case document. At the year 3 contradiction, at Wen Shu sitting to the side, at Liu Qing still standing, at Duan Fei. "This hearing is suspended," he said, "pending referral to the Imperial Audit Office." The documentation submitted establishes sufficient grounds for a formal investigation of the Western Region's Supply Commission. He looked at Duan Fei. "Commissioner Duan Fei, you are relieved of your supply authority pending the outcome of that investigation. Your requisition order against this township is voided. The charges against Township Elder Chen Wei are dismissed, the obstruction and commercial charges as procedurally unfounded, and the harboring charge as," he paused, "contradicted by the humanitarian record just presented, which describes feeding a hostile force into a stand-down rather than collaborating with it." Duan Fei stood. His advocates reached for him. He ignored them. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. "Not to the adjudicator. To me. The supply system in the Western regions runs on the arrangements I built. Remove me and the whole. The whole thing works correctly," I said. "That's the point. The arrangements you built were the malfunction. Removing them is the repair." He looked at me with the particular hatred of a man who has just watched his life's careful work become evidence against him. Then the Imperial Guards, adjudicator Shu's, not Duan Fei's, escorted him from the hall. We should have won cleanly. We had won cleanly, in the hall, but Duan Fei, falling, did one last thing. I learned it 2 days later, back at the settlement, when a rider came from the northern feeding posts at full gallop. Duan Fei, in the weeks before the hearing, had hired raiders. Not Bader's people, independent northern raiders, the kind that had burned Meng Da's gate and killed Wang Fu's apprentice. He had hired them as a contingency, an insurance policy, a way to create chaos that would justify emergency supply authority if the hearing went against him. He had hired them before he was relieved of authority, and the order he had given them, attack the northern approach under an imperial banner, was still in motion when he fell, because he had no way to recall men he had paid in advance to act independently. The raiders hit Beitor's camp, under an imperial flag, which meant that from Beitor's position, the Empire had just attacked him under a flag of truce, during a stand-down he had agreed to in good faith, 3 days after his niece had assured him the Southerners could be trusted. The stand-down was breaking. Not because Bator had chosen to break it, because Duan Fei, falling, had reached out one last time and struck the thing I had spent 20 days assembling. It wasn't a bigger villain above Duan Fei. There was no mastermind behind him. It was just Duan Fei himself, a bureaucrat with enough money to hire violence and enough spite to use it on his way down. The dying sting of a defeated man. Kyra found me at the North Gate as I was reading the rider's report. My uncle sent word, she said. Her face was tight. The raiders wore imperial colors. His war leaders are saying the stand-down was a trap, that the feeding posts were softening his force before an imperial strike. She looked at me. He doesn't believe it, but he can't hold his war leaders on his belief alone. They watched an imperial banner attack their camp. She paused. He needs proof, fast, that the attack wasn't sanctioned, that it was Duan Fei's independent contingency, not an imperial order. I looked north. The horde that had stood down was reforming, not because Bator wanted war, because a dying man's spite had made his war leaders demand it. 8,600 people, reforming for a full assault, against a wall that would hold 32 defenders, 6 cannons, and every single one of the 1,400 people we had fed on the road, whose survival had just been reframed by Duan Fei's raiders as evidence of a trap. I had won the hearing, and winning the hearing had triggered the one thing I hadn't fully prepared for. I looked at Kyra. How long until the assault? I said. Dawn, she said. Maybe. My uncle is buying time, but his war leaders won't wait long. She looked at me. You have until dawn to give him something he can show them. Proof that the Empire didn't order the attack. I thought about the hearing. About Adjudicator Shu's ruling. About Duan Fei being relieved of authority 2 days before the raiders struck. The proof existed. The ruling. The dismissal. The formal record that Duan Fei had been relieved of supply authority before the raiders attacked, which meant the attack, ordered by a man who no longer had authority, could not be an imperial order. I had the proof. It was in the Adjudicator's ruling. I just had to get it to Bator's war leaders before dawn, in a form they would accept, through a barbarian camp that currently believed the Empire had betrayed them. Kyra, I said, can you get me into your uncle's camp before dawn? She looked at me. You want to walk into a camp of 8,000 people who think the Empire just attacked them, she said. At night, before an assault. I want to bring your uncle the proof his war leaders demanded, I said, in person, because a document sent by messenger is easy to dismiss as forgery. A man who walks into your camp alone, carrying the truth, the night before you attack him, that's harder to dismiss. I looked at her. Bator respects people who don't flinch. This is the thing you don't flinch at. Kyra looked at me for a long moment. He'll respect it, she said quietly. If it doesn't get you killed first, then let's make sure it doesn't, I said. Zhao Yan behind me made a sound. I'm coming, she said. No, I said. 1 man alone is proof of confidence, 2 is an escort. Bator's war leaders read the difference the same way he does. I looked at her. I go alone, with Kyra. That's the version that works. Zhao Yan's jaw was tight. Every instinct her father had built in her was screaming against this. If you die out there, then the wall holds and you win the battle without me, I said. But I'm not going to die out there. I'm going to walk into that camp, hand Bator the Adjudicator's ruling, and give his war leaders the proof that Duan Fei acted alone. I looked at her. This is the same thing I've done the whole time. Documentation, correct channel, right person. The channel is just more dangerous this time. She looked at me for a long moment. Come back, she said. It wasn't an order. It was the closest Zhao Yan came to something else. I will, I said. I turned to Kyra. Tonight, I said. Take me to your uncle. Bator's camp at night was 10,000 fires. That was the first thing I understood as Kyra led me over the final ridge. Not the size of the force in numbers, which I already knew, but the size of it in light. 10,000 cook fires and torches spread across the valley floor like a fallen sky, each one a small circle of people, each circle a family or a fighting group or a knot of the hungry who had marched 40 days because staying north meant dying slower. I had fed 1,400 of them on the road. The rest were down there, in the firelight, believing the Empire had just attacked them under a flag of truce. Stay close, Kyra said. Don't speak unless my uncle speaks to you. And when the war leaders challenge you, they will. Don't defend yourself. Show them the document. Let it speak. Understood, I said. We went down. The camp knew we were coming before we reached the first fires. Kyra had sent a rider ahead, and word had moved through the camp the way word moves through any organized force. Fast and quiet. People turned to watch as we passed. Northern faces, hard from the march, looking at the southerner walking into their camp the night before they were meant to destroy his wall. I kept my eyes forward, and my hands visible, and my pace steady. Bader's tent was at the center, larger than the others, but not ornate, a command tent, functional, built for a man who led from the middle of his people rather than above them. Kyra went in first, I followed. Inside, Bader stood at a rough table with a map on it. Around him, 6 men, his war leaders, the ones Kyra had described, the ones who had watched an imperial banner attack their camp and now demanded the war they had marched for. They looked at me the way men look at something they have already decided to kill. Bator looked at me differently. He looked at me the way he had looked at me at the marker stone, assessing, foundation first. You came, he said. You needed proof, I said. Proof is easy to dismiss when it arrives by messenger. Harder when the man who carries it walks into your camp alone the night before you plan to kill him. I paused. So I came. One of the war leaders said something in the northern dialect. Sharp, angry. Kyra didn't translate, but I didn't need the translation. The tone was clear. This is the man whose feeding posts softened us, whose empire attacked us, and he walks in here and we listen to him? Bator raised a hand. The war leader stopped. Your empire, Bator said to me, attacked my camp, under a truce flag, under an imperial banner, 3 days after I agreed to stand down on your word. His voice was level, which was worse than anger. Give me a reason this is not the trap my war leaders say it is. I reached into my satchel and produced the document. Adjudicator Shu's ruling, the formal record of the hearing. I had asked him for a sealed copy before we left the county seat, and he had provided it. Precise man that he was, he understood that documentation was the point. I placed it on the map table. 2 days before the raiders attacked your camp, I said. Imperial Supply Commissioner Duan Fei was relieved of all authority by an Imperial Bureau adjudicator. This document is the ruling. It is dated, sealed, and witnessed by the county lord. I looked at Bator. The raiders who attacked you were hired by Duan Fei before the hearing, as a contingency. He paid them in advance to attack the northern approach under an imperial banner, to create chaos he could use to justify emergency authority if the hearing went against him. I paused. The hearing went against him. He was relieved of authority, but he had already paid the raiders, and a man with no authority cannot recall men he paid to act independently. End quote. I looked at the 6 war leaders. The banner they wore was a lie. The order they followed came from a man who no longer had the power to give it. The Empire did not attack you. A disgraced criminal, falling, spent his last money on spite. Bator picked up the document. He read it, slowly, the same way he had read the case document at the marker stone, faster than I expected, missing nothing. He reached the date. Reached the seal. Reached Adjudicator Shu's ruling relieving Duan Fei of authority. 2 days before the attack. He looked at the date for a long time. Then he handed the document to the war leader who had spoken. The angry one. The man said something. Bator answered. The man read the document himself. He could read imperial script, apparently, which surprised me, and his expression changed as he reached the date. The room was quiet. Duan Fei, Bator said finally, the man who closed our trade routes. The same man, I said, who has now been removed. Relieved of authority pending investigation, I said. The investigation will confirm 11 years of documented theft. He will not hold authority again. The trade routes he closed can be reopened. Bator looked at me across the map table. You destroyed the man who starved my people, he said slowly, 2 days before his hired raiders attacked my camp. And then you walked into my camp to prove it was him and not your empire. He paused. Why did you not simply let us attack your wall? Your wall would hold. You told me so yourself. You would have won the battle. Because winning the battle would have killed thousands of your people and dozens of mine, I said. And at the end of it, the trade routes would still need to be reopened, and the supply relationship would still need to be built, except now across a battlefield of dead people. I looked at him. I don't want to win a battle against you, Bader. I want to build a supply chain with you. Dead people don't buy grain. Something moved across Bator's face, not a smile, something older and heavier than a smile. My father, he said, spent his life fighting the South. He died believing there was no other way, that the South would always close the routes, always let us starve, always leave us the single choice of raid or die. He looked at the document in the war leader's hands. He was wrong. There was another way. It just required someone in the South who wanted to build instead of steal. He looked at me. I did not think that person existed. He didn't, I said. For a long time, the system was built to make sure he didn't. Duan Fei's arrangements guaranteed that no one in the South could deal fairly with the North, because the man controlling the supply chain profited from the war. I paused. I just removed the man. What's underneath was always possible. Supply meeting demand. It was only ever the corruption in between that made it impossible. Bator was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to his war leaders and spoke. A long statement, in the northern dialect, of which I understood nothing except the tone, which had shifted from the crackling tension of men about to fight to something heavier and more deliberate. The angry war leader answered. Bator answered him. Another spoke. Kyra leaned toward me and translated quietly. He's telling them the attack was Duan Fei, not the Empire, she murmured. He's telling them the man who starved us has been destroyed by the same southerner they wanted to kill. She paused, listening. Ruvan, the angry one, says the warriors marched 40 days and expect something for it. Bator says they will have something. Food, guaranteed, and open trade routes. And the head of the man who closed them. She listened. Ruvan says the warriors want a conquest, not a trade agreement. She paused. Bator says a conquest feeds them once. A trade agreement feeds them every year. I looked at Bator. He was making the same argument to his war leaders that I had made to him at the marker stone. A granary you take once and empty is worth less than a granary that produces indefinitely. He had heard it, he had understood it, and now he was carrying it to his own people in his own words. That was the whole thing. You didn't defeat a provider, you gave him a better way to provide. The debate went on. I stood and waited and did not flinch, because Kyra had told me that flinching was the thing Bator's people would not respect, and because I had walked into a camp of 10,000, and the only thing left to do was hold still and let the truth work. Finally, Bator raised his hand. The war leaders went quiet. He looked at me. Dawn, he said, my warriors marched 40 days. They will not turn around on a document, however true. They need to see it. All of them. Not 6 war leaders in a tent. All of them. He paused. You said you feed people. You said that is what you do. He looked at me steadily. Then feed them. At dawn. 10,000. If the food is real, if it is enough, if you do the thing you claim to do in front of every warrior I have, then the trade agreement is real to them, not just to me. He leaned forward. But if you cannot do it, if the granary you built is a claim and not a fact, then my war leaders get their conquest. Do you understand what I am asking? I understood exactly what he was asking. 10,000 people, fed, at dawn, in front of every warrior in the horde, as proof that the trade relationship I was offering was real, that the granary produced enough to be worth more as a partner than as a conquest. The spatial farm scaled with registered dependents, 377 registrations, 460 units per cycle after Rook's group. That output fed my settlement. It did not feed 10,000, unless I did the thing I had been avoiding since the war tier activated. Unless I registered them. Quartermaster's report, emergency query registered dependents, 460 spatial farm output, 460 units cycle query, mass registration, estimated 8,600 dependents, projected vitality cost, 8,600 days, warning, vitality cost exceeds host remaining vitality. Registration of this magnitude may result in host. I closed the report before it finished the sentence. 8,600 days, 23 years. More vitality than I could be certain I had. But there was another way. I had learned it from Su Ling. Vitality cost was per registered dependent. But feeding didn't require permanent registration. The spatial farm's output scaled with registered dependents. But the farm's stored capacity, everything I had grown and preserved over 6 months, everything in the granary, everything the 2 neighboring villages had deposited, everything the consortium held, that was already grown, already paid for, already mine. I didn't need to register 10,000 people to feed them once. I needed to open the granary. I looked at Bator. At dawn, I said, outside my wall, I will feed every warrior you have, not from a claim, from the granary itself. Bator studied me. You are certain, he said. I built the richest granary in the western counties, I said. You marched 10,000 people toward it, because it was worth marching toward. It was always going to come to this. The granary feeding the people who came for it. I looked at him. I'd rather feed them as guests than have them take it as spoils. But either way, they eat. So let them eat as guests. Beitor looked at me for a long moment. Then, for the second time, he extended his hand. "Dawn," he said. I walked back to the wall in the dark with Kyra, and I did not sleep. And at the first gray light of dawn, I opened the granary. All of it, 6 months of production. 412 sacks of grain and everything after them. The surplus from the spatial farm, the preserved stores, the war bond deposits from the 2 villages, the consortium reserves. Everything I had built, everything I had grown, everything I had paid for in days of my own life, one dependent at a time. I had Zhao Yan's militia and Rook's people and Meng Da's masons and every able body in the settlement build feeding lines outside the north gate. Long trestle tables from the timber we had, cook fires, dozens of them, then 100. Liu Qing organized the food preparation with the efficiency she brought to everything, and the northern clan families who had come to us over the past weeks worked the lines alongside my people, because they knew how to feed a moving army and my settlers didn't. And the horde came, not as an assault, as a line. 10,000 people, moving toward the granary they had marched 40 days to reach, and finding it open. Finding grain porridge and preserved fish and dried vegetables handed to them by the 1,400 of their own people we had fed on the road, who now stood on the serving side of the tables and handed food to the warriors who had marched all the way here to take it. I stood at the gate and watched 10,000 people eat. The spatial farm, in the corner of my vision, ran its cycle. 460 units. Not enough to feed 10,000 from production alone. But the granary, the stored granary, 6 months of everything, was enough. It emptied through the morning, sack after sack, barrel after barrel, and I felt each one leave the way you feel money leave. Except it wasn't money, it was the thing money was supposed to buy, which was people not being hungry. They sent me here to disappear. I fed them instead. Not 12 men on a cliff, 10,000 at a wall. But it was the same act. It had always been the same act. Beitor found me at the gate near midday, when the lines had thinned and most of the horde had eaten, and the sound across the valley had changed from the tension of an army to the low murmur of people who had eaten and were no longer certain what they were fighting for. "Reuven," Beitor said, "my war leader, the angry one." He looked out at the tables. He ate. Then he stood and watched your people feed his warriors for an hour. Then he came to me and said the thing I hoped he would say. "What did he say?" I asked. He said, "A man does not burn a house that feeds him." Beitor looked at me. "That is a northern saying, very old. It means the same thing you said at the marker stone. A granary that produces is worth more than a granary you empty." He paused. "The warriors will not attack. Reuven will not let them, and Reuven was the one who wanted the attack. The others follow Reuven." He looked out at the valley. "The horde is finished. Not defeated. Finished. There is nothing left to march toward. The thing they marched for is being handed to them for free." I looked out at the valley too. The horde that had left its winter camp at 10,000, that had arrived at 8,600 after the feeding posts, that had reformed for an assault after Duan Fei's dying sting. That horde was sitting in the valley eating, and it was not an army anymore. It was 10,000 hungry people who had stopped being hungry. Some would go north when the trade routes reopened. Some would stay and work, and I would register them over weeks the way Su Ling had planned, spreading the cost, building the base with productive dependents first. Some would drift into the western counties and become whatever people become when they stop being part of a horde, but none of them would attack the wall, because you do not burn a house that feeds you. The trade agreement took 3 days to draft. Beitor and I sat at the settlement, in the meeting room where I had negotiated with the county lord, where Su Ling's ledger had converted a requisition into a consortium, and built the framework of a supply relationship between the northern clans and the western producing zones. Su Ling wrote the terms. Wen Shu provided the imperial procedural structure that would make it hold up under bureau review. Kyra recorded everything. Grain flows north on a fixed schedule. Horses and northern raw materials flow south. Seasonal labor exchange in the harvest months. The whole thing documented, signed, mutually binding, a commercial agreement between the parties who actually produced and consumed, not an imperial decree that the next commissioner could reverse. The northern trade routes, closed for 4 years by a man who profited from closing them, reopened by 2 men who profited from opening them. On the 3rd day, Beitor signed. Then he mounted his horse, gathered the war leaders and the warriors who were returning north, and rode back toward the winter camp with the first grain shipment of the agreement, not taken, purchased, at the fixed rate we had set, loaded on wagons behind him. Kyra stayed. Recorder for the agreement, she said, when I raised an eyebrow. Someone has to track the shipments and verify the terms on the northern side. My uncle trusts my accounts. She paused. Also, I want to see how you register people into whatever the system is that let you feed 10,000 from a granary that shouldn't have held that much. She looked at me. You're going to explain that eventually. Eventually, I said. She almost smiled. It was, I noticed, the same almost smile Zhao Yan used. Maybe it was a recorder thing. Maybe it was a thing that happened to people who spent their lives watching carefully and learned to hold their reactions until they were sure. The Emperor's envoy arrived 11 days later. I was at the wall when the rider came. A single imperial courier, fast horse, the 5-clawed dragon seal on his satchel. Not a war party, not a supply commission, a messenger. He dismounted at the north gate and asked for Township Elder Chen Wei. I came down from the wall. He handed me a sealed letter, Imperial Court Seal. 5 claws. I broke the seal and read it. The Imperial Audit Office had received the documentation on Duan Fei. The investigation had confirmed the 11-year pattern across 7 zones. Duan Fei was to be formally charged. The Western Region's Supply Commission was to be dissolved and restructured under direct audit office oversight. And there was more. His Imperial Majesty has been apprised of the resolution of the northern threat at the western frontier, of a township that reduced an invading force of 10,000 without a general engagement, through the provision of food and the negotiation of a trade agreement that has reopened the closed northern routes. His Majesty notes that the capital's own grain reserves have fallen critically low following 4 years of commission mismanagement, and that the restructuring of the Western Supply Commission will require a person who understands both the production and the distribution of grain at scale, and who has demonstrated the ability to convert scarcity into surplus and enemies into partners. His Majesty requests. I stopped reading. I looked up at the courier. The capital is starving, I said. The capital is in difficulty, the courier said, in the careful language of imperial couriers who do not confirm the words the capital is starving out loud. His Majesty requests your presence to discuss the restructuring of the Western Supply Commission and matters related to the capital's provisioning. The capital was starving. 4 years of Duan Fei's mismanagement, the same pattern I had documented, replicated across 7 zones. It had hollowed out the imperial reserves. And now the Emperor was asking me, a township elder on the western frontier who 6 months ago had been an exiled logistics officer with nothing, to come and fix the thing that Duan Fei had broken at the center of the entire empire. I thought about the coast, about Harven Crest and the famine coast, and the Emperor who had extended his hand without requiring me to bow, about 7 zones with filed surveys that nobody had read. This was one of those 7 zones, the largest, the center. I thought about the vitality debt, 460 days. Every person I registered, 1 more. If I went to the capital, if I restructured its provisioning, if I registered the people who depended on that supply chain, I did not finish that calculation. Not yet. I looked at the wall, at the settlement behind it, at Zhao Yan who had come down to stand at my shoulder when she saw the imperial seal, at Su Ling in the doorway of the administrative building with her ledger, at Liu Qing, at the clinic, watching, at Kyra, recording, at Meng Da, at the base of the wall he had built, running his hand along the mortar joint the way he always did. 10,000 people fed. A trade agreement signed, the northern routes reopened, Duan Fei falling, the capital asking. I set the letter down on the flat stone beside the gate. I didn't answer the courier immediately. I looked north, toward the winter camp where Bator was carrying the first grain shipment home. Then east, toward the coast where the salt pans were still evaporating and Marin was still running the ledger. Then south, toward the county seat and the roads that led to the capital, where the center of an empire was quietly running out of food. The capital is starving. His Majesty requests. I set the letter down, because before I answered the Emperor, there was a granary to refill and a settlement to secure, and 3 women standing around me who had gone from cursed and dangerous and useless to the foundation of everything I had built. And whatever I decided about the capital, I was going to decide it with them, not for them, with them. The courier waited. I looked at the letter on the stone, at the 5-clawed seal. Then I looked at Su Ling. Bring your ledger, I said. We have a decision to make. And that was where I let the Emperor wait.